Hello everyone, in today's video I will be narrating stories that I found off of Reddit. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But without further ado,
let's get straight into these stories.
I was working late in an office building downtown. The place had its own multi-level parking garage with one of those little booths where an attendant would sit during the day to collect parking fees. That night, the booth was usually empty. Employees could leave with their key cards. It was almost midnight when I finally left the building. My car was on the third floor of the garage, and the place was eerily silent except for the occasional hum of a flickering fluorescent light. As I approached the stairs, I noticed the light in the parking booth was on, which struck me as odd. The booth was always empty at this hour. Out of curiosity, I glanced in as I passed. A man was sitting inside, hunched over the counter, scribbling furiously on a pad of paper. He wore a crisp white shirt and a dark vest that looked like it belonged to a ballet from decades ago. He didn't acknowledge me, and I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe the building had hired someone to keep an eye on things after hours. When I got to my car, I realized I'd forgotten my phone on my desk. Annoyed, I decided to run back upstairs to grab it. On my way back down, I noticed the booth light was off, and it looked empty again. I slowed as I passed, peering inside to confirm. The man was gone, but the pad of paper was still on the counter, a pen resting on top. Something about it felt wrong. I don't know why, but I felt compelled to look at the pad. I hesitated, debating whether to just leave, but my curiosity got the better of me. I opened the booth door and flipped through the pages. They were filled with names, dozens, maybe hundreds of them, written in the same neat, deliberate handwriting. On the last page, my name was written at the very bottom. The sound of footsteps echoed from the stairwell behind me. My heart froze. I turned, but the stairs were empty. I sprinted to my car and sped out of the garage without looking back. I didn't stop until I was halfway home. That night, I couldn't sleep. The memory of that man and my name on the pad haunted me. The next day, I asked the building manager about the booth. He seemed confused and told me no one had been hired to work nights, and the booth hadn't been used in years. I checked the garage myself after work that evening, but the booth was dark and empty. The pad of paper was gone. A few weeks after that night, I began noticing strange things. It started small. Misplaced items in my apartment, like my keys or wallet being in spots I was certain I hadn't left them. At first, I chalked it up to stress. After all, the incident in the parking lot had left me rattled, and I figured my mind was playing tricks on me. But then, it escalated. One evening, I came home to find a sticky note on my kitchen counter. It wasn't mine. The paper was the same cheap kind they used in office supply closets, and the handwriting was eerily familiar, neat, deliberate, the same as the names in the pad from the booth. The note simply said, "See you soon." My stomach dropped. I checked all the doors and windows, but everything was locked. No signs of a break-in. I told myself it must have been a prank, though I had no idea how anyone could have gotten inside. Over the next few nights, I started hearing noises. At first, it was faint, scratches on the walls, a soft tap 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 on the window in the living room. But I lived on the third floor of an apartment building. No tree branches or stray animals could reach up that high. One night, I woke up to the sound of my front door handle jiggling. I froze in bed, straining to hear. A moment later, there was a soft knock, 3 slow, deliberate taps. I grabbed my phone and called the police, whispering my address and begging them to hurry. When the officers arrived, they found nothing. No one in the hallways, no signs of forced entry. They assured me it was probably a one-off incident, maybe a prank by a neighbor or a misunderstanding. But I knew better. The next morning, I found another note slipped under my door. Don't bother. I was done. I packed a bag and drove to a friend's house across town, too afraid to spend another night in my apartment. My friend, Amanda, was sympathetic but skeptical. She thought I was overreacting, that it was likely just someone messing with me. That night at her place, I felt a small measure of relief. I locked all the doors and windows, double-checked them twice. Amanda and I stayed up late watching movies, trying to take my mind off everything. Around 2 a.m., Amanda's phone buzzed. She frowned, then held it up for me to see. It was a text from an unknown number. Let her know I can still see her. My blood ran cold. Amanda's apartment was on the 5th floor, and we hadn't told anyone I was there. We called the police again, but just like before, they found nothing. No sign of a break-in, no evidence of anyone nearby. The number that texted Amanda led to a burner phone, untraceable. I left town the next day. I didn't even go back to my apartment to get my things. I just paid my landlord to clear it out. I moved halfway across the country, changed my number, deleted all my social media. For a while, I thought it worked, but last week, I got a package at my new place. No return address, just my name written on the front and that same familiar handwriting. I debated throwing it out, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside was a single sheet of paper. anymore. You can't run forever. I haven't slept since. The package was the last straw. I was beyond terrified and utterly exhausted. I knew I couldn't keep running, but I also couldn't let this consume me. I had to figure out who or what was doing this to me. I decided to go back to the beginning, the parking garage. Armed with a flashlight and a canister of pepper spray, I returned to the city late one evening. I felt foolish even stepping foot into the same garage, but I was desperate for answers. The place looked exactly as I remembered, dark, empty, and held me with that eerie fluorescent glow. The booth was still there, its glass smudged and the inside empty. I opened the door cautiously, half expecting to see the man from that night sitting there, scribbling away. But there was nothing, not even the pad of paper. I shone my flashlight around, scanning every corner, every surface. Then I noticed something odd. The back wall of the booth, which I thought was solid, had a faint outline, a seam that suggested a hidden door. My heart raced as I pressed against it. The door gave way with a soft creak, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into the darkness. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, but I forced myself forward. The air grew colder and heavier with each step. At the bottom of the stairs was a small, windowless room. It was dimly lit by a single hanging bulb, and the walls were lined with filing cabinets. In the center of the room was a table, and on it sat the pad of paper. I approached slowly, my hands trembling. The pad was open, and the pages were filled with more names that didn't seem to end. I flipped through them until I reached the last page. There was my name again, circled this time, with 2 words scrawled underneath. Final step. A sound behind me made me whip around. The stairs creaked as if someone, or something, was coming down. My flashlight beam darted across the room, but there was nothing there. Still, the creaking continued, closer and closer. I backed up against the wall, clutching my pepper spray, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear anything else. Then the light bulb flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. I don't know how, but I found the courage, or maybe the desperation, to make a break for it. I sprinted blindly toward where I thought the stairs were, my shoulders slamming into walls and my flashlight bouncing wildly in my hand. I made it up the stairs and burst into the open air of the parking garage, gasping and shaking. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. I tore out of the garage and drove straight to the nearest police station. I tried explaining what I'd found, but I could tell they didn't take me seriously. A hidden room in a parking garage. A mysterious man with a pad of names. It sounded crazy even to me. When they finally agreed to check it out, I went with them, desperate to show them I wasn't imagining things. But when we returned to the garage, the booth was gone. Not just empty, the entire structure had been removed, as if it had never been there at all. The officers gave me a sympathetic but skeptical look before leaving. I don't know who or what is behind this. I don't know how they knew where I was, how they removed that booth so quickly, or what the room and the names mean. But I do know one thing. I haven't seen the last of them, and I fear next time it'll truly be my final stop. A couple of years ago, I enrolled in a night class at a local university. It was a philosophy course that met in one of those huge, tiered lecture halls. The class was packed, but for some reason, I always ended up sitting in the same seat near the back, 3rd row from the top. It wasn't assigned, but it became my spot. One night, I arrived later than usual, and the only seat left was directly in the center of the very last row. It felt oddly isolated back there, but I didn't have much choice. The professor's voice echoed faintly, as if I was listening to him through a tunnel, and I felt strangely disconnected from the rest of the class. About halfway through the lecture, I felt a sudden chill crawl up my spine. It wasn't the air conditioning, it felt deliberate, like someone had pressed icy fingers along my neck. I glanced to my left and right, but the row was empty on either side of me. I tried to shake it off and refocus on the professor, but out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a shadow moving along the wall behind me. It didn't match the movements of anyone in the room. When I turned to look directly at it, there was nothing there, just a blank white wall and the faint hum of fluorescent lights. After that, I couldn't focus. I started feeling like someone or something was watching me. I kept glancing over my shoulder, but the only thing behind me was the wall and a small, locked maintenance door labeled authorized personnel only. It wasn't the kind of door anyone would casually use during a class, and it didn't look like it had been opened in years. I brushed it off as nerds or maybe exhaustion. The lecture eventually ended, and I filed out with the rest of the students. As I reached the exit, I turned back to glance at my row one last time. That's when I saw it. There, in the seat I had been sitting in, was a figure. Not a person, not really. It was more like an outline of a person, a faint, flickering silhouette that didn't seem quite solid. It was sitting perfectly still, facing the front of the room. My heart raced as I stared, frozen in place. It didn't turn to look at me, but I swear I felt it notice me. The longer I looked, the more I could make out vague details, a shape that was wrong, proportions that didn't make sense. I blinked, and it was gone. I left in a hurry and tried to convince myself I was just tired, but I avoided that back row from then on, even if it meant sitting on the floor. floor. A few weeks later, I'd overheard some classmates talking about the shadow in the back row. One girl swore she saw it too, a dark shape sitting perfectly still in one of the seats. Another guy chimed in, saying he'd heard rumors that years ago, a janitor had locked himself in that maintenance room and, well, he never made it out. I dropped the class shortly after that. A few months after dropping the class, I mostly forgot about the incident. Life moved on, and I chalked the experience up to stress, overactive imagination, or a strange coincidence. But deep down, there was always a nagging feeling that what I saw wasn't just in my head. One evening, I ran into a former classmate, Julia, at a coffee shop. She had also taken the philosophy course and immediately recognized me. "Hey, did you ever finish that class?" she asked, stirring her drink. I shook my head. "No, I dropped it. That lecture hall creeped me out." Her expression shifted, becoming serious. "Yeah, I don't blame you. Something wasn't right in there." I leaned in, subtly curious. "Did you ever say anything weird?" Julia hesitated, then nodded. "Not exactly what you'd call weird, more like unsettling. I kept hearing footsteps in the back row when no one was sitting there. Sometimes I'd feel like someone was standing right behind me, even though I was in the middle of a crowded row. It got so bad I stopped going to class entirely." I told her about the shadowy figure I had seen in the maintenance door in the back. Her face went pale. "You're not the only one," she said quietly. "Apparently, that door used to lead to a storage closet, but after they renovated the building, it got sealed up. No one knows why, but students who sit in the back row keep complaining about things, feeling watched, cold spots, shadows that don't belong." She glanced around the coffee shop nervously, as though afraid someone might overhear. "There's this story going around. Back in the 82nds, a professor went missing. He was one of those eccentric types who spent way too much time on campus. The rumor is that he went into that closet one night and never came out. Some students think he is still there, or maybe what's left of him is." I laughed nervously, but the uneasy feeling crept back into my chest. Julia continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. "They say if you sit in the back row alone, especially near that door, you might feel him. And if you do, don't turn around. If you look at him, he notices you." Her words brought me back to that night in the lecture hall. The way I had felt the figure notice me without it even turning. A shiver ran down my spine. "I think I did look," I admitted, my voice barely audible. "I saw something." Julia's eyes widened. She reached across the table and grabbed my hand. "You should stay away from that building. Just don't go back." I didn't need convincing, but what she said next left me even more shaken. "You know how they have security cameras in the lecture halls now?" she asked. "My friend works in the tech department and had to pull footage from that room once. He swore there was something on the tape, something sitting in the back row. He said the chairs moved, like someone was getting up and walking out. But when he rewound the footage, the rows were empty the entire time." I didn't sleep much that night. Months later, I drove past the university campus on my way home from work. As I glanced at the building where the lecture hall was, I couldn't help but feel like it was watching me. I turned my eyes back to the road, gripped the steering wheel tightly, and drove faster. Months turned into years, and I had successfully moved on with my life, or so I thought. I hadn't stepped foot near that university, let alone the lecture hall, but the memories occasionally crept back, uninvited. The shadow, the chill, the stories, they had settled somewhere in the back of my mind like a faint itch I couldn't scratch. It wasn't until last year that I started to feel like it wasn't just in my head anymore. I had been working at a new job for about a year, a standard office gig that required a lot of late nights. The building was fairly modern, all glass and steel, with wide open workspaces and brightly lit conference rooms. But even in such a clean, professional environment, I started noticing odd things. At first, it was small. Papers left on my desk would be slightly out of place, even though I was meticulous about organizing my workspace. My office chair, which I always pushed in, would sometimes be slightly turned or pulled back when I returned from a quick break. I chalked it up to forgetfulness or an overzealous cleaner. Then, one night, I was working late, alone. The office was completely silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. I had headphones on, lost in a spreadsheet, when I felt it, that same chill, sharp and deliberate, crawling up my neck. I froze, my hands hovering above the keyboard. Slowly, I turned in my chair. The office was empty, just rows of darkened desks and monitors, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I tried to laugh it off and went back to work, but the feeling wouldn't go away. Every so often, I would catch movement in my peripheral vision, a shadow flitting past a cubicle, something shifting near the far wall. Each time I turned to look, there was nothing there. It was nearly midnight when I finally decided to pack up and leave. As I grabbed my bag and stood up, I heard a faint scraping sound, like a chair being pushed back. My heart pounded as I scanned the room. All the chairs were empty, neatly tucked under their desks. I told myself it was just the building settling or the HVAC system kicking on. But then, as I turned toward the elevator, I saw it. In the reflection of the glass wall separating the office from the hallway, there was a figure standing behind me. Dark, flickering, and impossibly still, just like the one I had seen in the lecture lecture hall years ago. My breath caught in my throat as I spun around, but the space behind me was empty. The reflection was gone too. I didn't take the elevator. I ran down the stairs, all 15 flights, and didn't stop until I was outside in the cool night air. Even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me, just out of sight. The next morning, I emailed my boss and told them I wasn't feeling well. I stayed home for a week, trying to convince myself that it was just stress or a lack of sleep. But when I finally returned to the office, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. On my desk, right in the center of my keyboard, was a single piece of paper. It wasn't mine, and I hadn't left it there. It was blank, except for one thing, a small, hand-drawn door in the center of the page. It was unmistakably the same door I had seen in the lecture hall all those years ago. I quit that job a week later and moved to a different city. I've done everything I could to leave the past behind me, but every now and then, I still feel it, that faint, icy chill, that sense of being watched. And sometimes, when I glance into a reflective surface, I catch a glimpse of something dark and flickering, just for a moment. About 3 years ago, I moved to a smaller city for work. The place had a quaint charm, brick buildings, cobblestone streets, and a bustling arts community. I wasn't much of an artist myself, but I loved exploring the murals that dotted the city. Each one seemed alive, filled with personality, stories, and vibrant colors. One mural, in particular, caught my attention on my way home from work. It was tucked away in a narrow alley between two old buildings, a stunning piece of art depicting a sprawling tree with its branches stretching into the sky, each one painted with surreal detail. Tiny figures lived among the branches, children playing, birds singing, even what looked like miniature houses carved into the bark. It felt like a storybook brought to life. I made a habit of stopping by that alley to admire the mural. It was always there, waiting for me like an old friend. One Friday evening, as I passed the alley, I noticed something odd. The mural wasn't quite the same. A new figure had appeared, an unfamiliar silhouette standing under the tree, barely noticeable but undeniably there. The figure was shadowy, almost blending into the background. I assumed it was an artist adding to the piece and thought nothing of it. The next day, curiosity got the better of me and I returned to the alley. The figure was still there, but it had changed position. Now it was further up the tree, standing on one of the branches, gazing down at the figures below. Its form seemed sharper, more defined, as if someone had painted it overnight. I asked around at a nearby coffee shop if anyone knew the artist behind the mural. The barista just shrugged and said the mural had been there for years, untouched as far as she knew. By Sunday, the figure had moved again, this time higher into the branches. It was unsettling now, too human in shape, almost as if it were watching me. I told myself it was just my imagination, but a gnawing unease settled in my stomach. That night, I had a vivid dream. I was standing in the alley, staring at the mural. The shadowy figure turned its head to look directly at me. Its eyes were hollow, black voids, and yet I couldn't look away. Slowly, it began climbing down the tree, its limbs stretching unnaturally, its movements too fluid to belong to anything human. I woke up in a cold sweat. I avoided the alley the next day. By Monday evening, my curiosity got the better of me, and I convinced myself to take one more look. As I turned the corner into the alley, my heart stopped. The mural was blank. No tree, no tiny figures, no shadowy silhouette. Just a plain, crumbly wall. I stood there, confused and terrified. I hadn't imagined it. I couldn't have. I visited that mural almost every day for weeks. As I stood frozen, a voice broke through my thoughts. Admiring the well. It was a man, middle-aged, wearing a janitor's uniform. He must have been coming out of a side door in the building. There was a mural here, I stammered. A tree with figures on the branches. The man gave me a puzzled look. There's never been a mural here. This wall's been bare for years. I didn't argue. I just walked away, my skin crawling. A few days later, I moved out of the city for unrelated reasons, but I've never stopped thinking about that mural, or what it might have meant. Did I imagine it? Did it somehow imagine me? After I moved, I tried to let the memory of the mural fade into the background. Life went on, and I convinced myself that maybe I'd been overworked or sleep deprived back then, and my mind had played tricks on me. But the story didn't end there. About 6 months after leaving the city, I got a call from an old coworker who still lived there. We caught up for a bit, and then, as casually as you might mention the weather, he asked, "Hey, did you ever see that creepy alley mural near your old apartment?" My stomach dropped. "What are you talking about?" I asked, trying to sound calm. "You know, the one with the tree and all the little people in it. I never noticed it until a couple of weeks ago. It's weird. I'm surprised you didn't mention it while you were here." I didn't respond right away. He went on, describing the mural exactly as I'd seen it, except now, the shadowy figure was sitting on one of the branches, legs dangling over the edge. I stammered out some vague response, something like, "Yeah, I think I saw it once or twice." After we hung up, I sat staring at my phone, a chill creeping up my spine. Why was the mural back back. Why hadn't anyone else noticed it before, and why was it changing? I couldn't resist the pull to learn more. Over the next few weeks, I scoured forums and social media looking for any mention of the mural. At first, I found nothing, but eventually, I stumbled upon a thread in a local urban legends group. Someone had posted a grainy photo of the mural, the tree, the figures, and yes, the shadowy figure sitting on the branch. The caption read, "Anyone else seen this? It's in an alley off 12th Street. Freaks me out." The comments were a mix of people dismissing it as graffiti and others saying they'd noticed it too. One comment, however, stood out. "If you see it, don't stare for too long. It watches back." I clicked on the commenter's profile, but it had been deleted. My heart was racing now. Against my better judgment, I messaged the original poster and asked if they'd noticed anything strange about the mural. They replied quickly, "Yeah, the figure moves." My friend said it wasn't there last year, but now it's all over the tree. I swear it's closer every time I look. Gonna stay away from it. Something feels off. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept picturing the shadowy figure, wondering how it could move, what it was, and why it seemed to appear and disappear at will. Worse, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just a figure in a painting, that somehow it was more aware than it should have been. Then, the dream started again. I'd find myself back in that alley, standing before the mural. The figure would always be there, climbing down the branches, getting closer and closer. Sometimes it whispered, but I could never make out the words. Other times, it simply stared at me, its hollow eyes unblinking. The final dream was the worst. This time, the figure wasn't in the mural. I was alone in the alley, staring at the blank wall, when I felt a presence behind me. Slowly, I turned, and there it was, taller than I'd imagined, its limbs impossibly long, its body twisted and shadow-like. It leaned down until its face was inches from mine. "Why did you leave?" it whispered, its voice like dry leaves scraping against concrete. I woke up screaming. I haven't had the dream since, but I've made a point to avoid any mention of the mural, that city, or anything remotely connected to it. Whatever it was, I think it's still there, waiting for someone else to notice it, someone else to draw closer. Months passed, and I did my best to put the mural and its shadowy figure out of my mind. Life carried on in its usual, mundane way, though I couldn't shake the occasional feeling that I was being watched. It wasn't constant, but every so often, walking home at night, sitting alone in my apartment, I'd feel that creeping sensation of unseen eyes. I told myself it was paranoia, just the residual fear from my experience. One evening, while scrolling through my social media feed, a familiar image stopped me cold. It was a post from someone in an entirely different city, hundreds of miles from where I had seen the mural. The photo showed a mural of a tree identical to the one I'd obsessed over. Tiny figures in the branches, the intricate details of the bark. It was unmistakable. My heart sank as I squinted at the photo. There it was, almost hidden among the branches, the shadowy figure. But this time, it wasn't sitting or climbing. It was leaning out of the mural, one hand reaching toward the person taking the photo. The caption read, "Spotted this weird mural downtown today. Cool, but creepy. Anyone know the artist?" I stared at the screen, dread pulling in my stomach. It was spreading. Somehow, and possibly, the mural had moved, or been recreated, far from its original location. I couldn't understand it, but I knew one thing for certain, this wasn't normal. Against my better judgment, I messaged the person who had posted the photo. I asked where the mural was, trying to sound casual. They replied quickly, giving me the address. It was in a trendy part of their city, tucked away in an alley just like before. They mentioned they'd only noticed it that morning. I wanted to ignore it. I wanted to delete the message and pretend I hadn't seen anything, but the pull was too strong. I couldn't help myself. I booked a train ticket and made plans to visit the city that weekend. When I arrived, I wandered the streets for a while, half hoping I wouldn't find the mural. But I did. Tucked into a quiet alley, it was exactly as I remembered it. The sprawling tree, the tiny figures in the branches, and the shadowy figure that seemed sharper, more lifelike than before. It was no longer on the tree. It was standing on the ground, as if it had stepped out of the mural. I backed away, my breath catching in my throat. It felt like it was watching me, and this time, I couldn't chalk it up to imagination. The air around the mural felt heavy, oppressive, like the weight of the figure's gaze was pressing against me. Suddenly, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to see a man in a hoodie walking toward me. He didn't seem to notice the mural at all. In fact, he walked right past it without a second glance. Headed. I called after him, desperate for some kind of human interaction to ground myself. He turned, looking confused. "Yeah," he asked. You didn't see the mural?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What mural?" He glanced back at the wall, then at me, his expression skeptical. "There's nothing there." My blood ran cold. I turned back to the mural, and sure enough, it was still there, as vivid and menacing as ever. But he couldn't see it. I thanked him and hurried out of the alley, my heart pounding. I didn't stop walking until I reached the safety of a crowded cafe, where I sat trembling, trying to process what had just happened. The mural was selective, visible to some, invisible to others. Why, I had no idea, but I was was certain now that it wasn't just a painting, it was something else entirely, something that didn't belong in this world. That night, back in my hotel room, I received a message from an unknown number. It was just a photo, the mural, with the shadowy figure in its original position, standing under the tree. But this time, there was something new. At the base of the tree, barely visible, was a small figure, a person unmistakably me. I blocked the number, packed my things, and left the city before sunrise. I've moved 3 times since then, and I've avoided any alleys, murals, or public art that looks even remotely suspicious. But I can't shake the feeling that it's still watching me, still following me, waiting for the right moment to step out of the shadows for good. This happened about 5 years ago when I was fresh out of college and desperate for a job. I was applying to anything and everything I could find, and one day I received an email response to an application I didn't remember sending. The email was brief, but it looked professional enough. A marketing agency was interested in interviewing me for a position as a junior content strategist. The company name seemed familiar, though I couldn't quite place it. The interview was scheduled at a co-working space in the city, about 40 minutes from where I lived. The address was included in the email, and I figured maybe this was a smaller agency without a dedicated office yet. That's not uncommon for startups, so I didn't think too much of it. When I arrived, the co-working building was quiet but open, the lobby was well lit, and the receptionist barely glanced up as I walked in. I told her I was there for an interview, and she gestured toward the elevators, saying, "Second floor, room 217. As I got off the elevator, the atmosphere shifted. The second floor felt off, the air was colder, and there was an odd, chemical smell like cleaning supplies, but too strong. The hallway was lined with generic doors labeled with printed signs, law offices, freelance collectives, that sort of thing. Room 217 was at the end of the hall, with a plain black door and no window. I knocked, and a man opened the door. He looked ordinary enough, middle-aged, neatly dressed, glasses. But something about his smile immediately unsettled me. It was wide, too wide, like he was trying hard to seem friendly but was failing miserably. "Come in," he said, stepping aside. The room was sparse, a single desk, 2 chairs, and no personal touches at all. The walls were white, completely bare. I noticed there were no windows, which made the room feel claustrophobic. I sat down, and he started asking questions, not about the job, but about me. Personal questions. Did I live alone? Did I have family in the area? How long had I been looking for work? At first, I answered politely, thinking maybe this was his way of breaking the ice. But then he asked if I'd ever worked late nights alone. That's when my stomach dropped. I stammered something vague, trying to steer the conversation back to the job. "So, what does your agency specialize in?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned back, his smile fading, and stared at me for what felt like an eternity. "You seem nervous," he finally said. "Are you always this jumpy?" I froze. My gut was screaming at me to leave, but I didn't want to be rude or seem paranoid. I forced a laugh and stood up, saying I'd forgotten something in my car and would be right back. He didn't try to stop me, but his smile returned. This time, it felt predatory. As soon as I was out of the room, I bolted down the hallway and into the stairwell. I didn't stop until I was back in my car with the doors locked. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely start the engine. When I got home, I tried looking up the company again, but this time I dug deeper. It didn't exist. The website listed in the email was a generic template with no real content, just placeholders. The domain had been registered 2 weeks prior. I reported the incident to the co-working space and forwarded the email to local authorities, but I never heard anything back. To this day, I have no idea who that man was or what he wanted, but I'm certain it wasn't a job interview. After reporting the incident, I thought that was the end of it. I chalked it up to a creepy scam, something designed to lure in desperate job seekers, though I didn't want to imagine what the endgame might have been. A week later, I received another email. This one was from a different company, one I had applied to and actually wanted to work for. The email was polished, professional, and included a link to schedule an interview. I was still shaken from the previous experience, but this company had a solid reputation and an office in a prominent business district. It felt safe. I scheduled the interview for the following Tuesday. When the day arrived, I double-checked everything, the company's website, LinkedIn profiles of their employees, even their Glassdoor reviews. Everything checked out. The office was in a sleek, high-rise building. I arrived early, took the elevator to the 14th floor, and checked in at the front desk. The receptionist was kind and handed me a visitor badge. I waited in a well-furnished lounge area with other candidates, which reassured me further. It was a world away from the bare, windowless room of my previous interview. Finally, my name was called. A well-dressed woman greeted me and led me into a conference room. The interview started off normal, typical questions about my experience, my skills, and how I'd handle various work scenarios. About halfway through, though, things started to feel strange again. The interviewer, who had been friendly and professional up until that point, suddenly paused and looked at me intently. She asked, "Have you ever been contacted by anyone unusual while job hunting?" The question was so unexpected that I laughed nervously. "Oh yeah, I guess," I said. Why, she didn't answer right away. Instead, she glanced at the door as if checking to make sure no one else was listening. Then she leaned forward and lowered her voice. "We've heard reports of fake job postings targeting young professionals," she said. "A few of our applicants mentioned experiences that sound unsettlingly similar. It's important to be cautious." My stomach dropped. I asked her if she could elaborate, but she just smiled tightly and redirected the conversation back to the job. When the interview ended, she shook my hand and told me they'd be in touch. As I left the building, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her warning. It was as though she knew something she wasn't allowed to say. That night, I decided to do more digging. I searched for news articles, forums, and any reports about fraudulent job postings or suspicious incidents. To my surprise, I found several accounts from people in my city, some eerily similar to my own experience. All of them described interviews in odd locations where the interviewer asked invasive personal questions or displayed unsettling behavior. One account stood out. It was a post on a local forum from someone who had gone to a similar fake interview at a co-working space. They mentioned a room number 217 and a man with a too wide smile, but their story ended differently. They wrote that when they tried to leave, the man blocked the door and wouldn't let them go until they agreed to some vague terms. They'd eventually escaped by screaming for help, which attracted attention from someone in the hallway. The post was dated 2 weeks before my encounter. I reported everything I'd found to the authorities again, but just like before, I never heard back. Since then, I've been hyper-vigilant about any job offers or interviews, always verifying every detail. Sometimes I wonder if the woman at the second interview knew more than she let on. Was she genuinely trying to help, or did she know something darker? For a while, I managed to push the unsettling events to the back of my mind. Life moved on. I eventually found a job at a small but reputable company, and things started to feel normal again. However, every so often, I would think about that strange interview and the warning from the second recruiter. I tried not to dwell on it, but something about the whole ordeal felt unfinished. Then, about a year later, I received an email from an unfamiliar address. The subject line read, "Are you still looking for opportunities?" My heart sank as I opened it. The message was short and generic, offering an exciting role at a growing company, but it was the tone that got to me, eerily similar to the fake interview email from room 217. The email included a new location, a recently opened co-working space across town. It wasn't the same building, but it was close enough to make me uneasy. There were no red flags in the email itself, but I knew better this time. I ignored the email and blocked the sender. A few days later, another message arrived, this time from a different address but with the same wording. It felt like they were testing me, trying to bait me into replying. I ignored it again. The following week, I noticed something strange. While walking to my car after work, I saw a man standing near the parking lot entrance, seemingly waiting for someone. He was dressed casually but looked vaguely familiar. He didn't approach me or say anything, but his presence set me on edge. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching me. The next day, he was there again, standing in almost the exact same spot. This time, I didn't stick around. I got into my car and drove to a nearby coffee shop, waiting until I was sure he was gone before heading home. That night, I started piecing things together. The man looked a lot like the interviewer from room 217, older, glasses, that unsettling smile. I told myself it was just paranoia, but deep down, I knew it wasn't a coincidence. The emails kept coming, always from new addresses and with slightly different wording. One even mentioned the name of the company where I was now working, as if to make the offer seem more enticing. I knew they were watching me. Eventually, I reached out to a friend who worked in cybersecurity. I forwarded them the emails and told them everything. A few days later, they got back to me with some chilling news. The email domains were being registered under fake names and routed through international servers, making them nearly impossible to trace. Whoever was behind this knew what they were doing. That's when I decided enough was enough. I contacted the police again, this time with the new information and my friend's findings. They seemed more interested this time, especially when I mentioned the man near my workplace. They advised me to change my routine, avoid predictable patterns, and keep an eye out for anything unusual. I started driving a different route to work and leaving at random times. I'd even moved apartments, hoping to throw off anyone who might be tracking me. For a while, it seemed to work. The emails stopped, and I stopped seeing the man near my office. But every now and then, I get the feeling I'm being watched. A stranger lingering too long in a coffee shop, a car I lead a little too close to mine at a red light. Maybe it's just paranoia, but I can't shake the feeling that whoever was behind those fake interviews hasn't given up. To the man from room 217 and anyone else in your little network, I've done everything I could to avoid you. Let's not meet, because if we do, I'm not sure I'll make it out unscathed this time. A few years ago, I was traveling through a small city in Eastern Europe, the kind of place that doesn't make it onto tourist maps. I've been backpacking for months and like to wander aimlessly, hoping to find hidden gems off the beaten path. That's how I stumbled onto the underground market. It was a chilly, overcast day, and I ducked into a narrow alley to escape the wind. Halfway down the alley, I noticed a faint sign above a door. The sign was a mess of faded Cyrillic letters, but one word was clear: bizarre. Intrigued, I pushed open the door and descended a steep set of stone steps into the building's basement. This space was sprawling and dimly lit by rows of flickering fluorescent lights. It smelled faintly of damp concrete and spices. The stalls were a chaotic mix of junk, antiques, food, and oddities, old Soviet-era metals, jars of pickled vegetables, handmade jewelry, and stacks of books in languages I couldn't read. The air buzzed with conversation, though I couldn't catch a single word. One stall caught my eye. It was small and tucked away in a shadowy corner. The vendor, an older woman with piercing gray eyes and wiry hair, sat silently behind a table covered in neatly arranged trinkets. Most of her wares seemed mundane: old watches, tarnished coins, and worn playing cards. But there was one item that stood out: a small, black notebook. Its cover was leather, scratched and weathered with age, and it seemed oddly out of place. "How much?" I asked, pointing at the notebook. She tilted her head, as if assessing me, and then smiled. Her teeth were unnervingly sharp. "It's free, but you must promise to never open it in this market." I laughed awkwardly, assuming it was some quirky local superstition, and accepted the notebook. I slipped it into my bag and wandered the market a little longer, but something about the woman's gaze lingered in my mind. After a while, I decided to leave. As I climbed the stairs back to the street, I felt an inexplicable weight in my chest, like I was being watched. That night, in my hostel room, curiosity got the better of me. I pulled out the notebook and opened it. The pages were blank, except for the first one, which had a single line written in spidery handwriting. "You looked." Chills ran down my spine. I flipped through the rest of the pages, but they were all empty. I shoved the notebook back into my bag and told myself I just imagined it. The next morning, I woke to find the notebook on the bedside table, even though I was sure I'd put it away. This time, the second page had writing: "Leave the city." I don't know how to explain it, but I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. The words didn't feel like a warning, they felt like a command. I decided not to test it. I packed my things and left the city on the next bus. A few days later, I was in a new city when I remembered the notebook. I pulled it out of my bag, but the pages were blank again. I tried to convince myself it had all been a weird coincidence, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd narrowly avoided something terrible. I never went back to that market, and I've kept the notebook locked away ever since. Sometimes, late at night, I think I hear faint scratching sounds coming from where it's hidden. I'm too afraid to check it. Despite the years that have passed, the notebook still haunts me. It's not something I've shared with many people because, honestly, who would believe me? The whole story sounds absurd, like something from a cheap horror novel, but I know it was real. I can still see the spidery handwriting and feel the icy dread it brought with it. I thought leaving it locked in an old box in the back of a closet would be the end of it, but the notebook hasn't let me forget. Every now and then, I dream about that market. It's always the same. I'm wandering those dimly lit aisles, hearing snippets of conversations in languages I don't understand. The stalls seem endless, and no matter how far I walk, I can't find the stairs to leave. The old woman is always there in her shadowy corner, her sharp teeth glinting as she smiles at me. I always wake up in a cold sweat, and the dreams seem to come more often now. Worse, I've started noticing strange things around my apartment. A faint, metallic smell that lingers in the air, objects shifting slightly when I know I haven't touched them. Once, I came home to find the closet door ajar, even though I always keep it shut. The box with the notebook was undisturbed, but I swear I heard faint scratching when I approached it. Last week, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to get rid of the notebook for good. I drove to a secluded spot by a river far from where I live and threw it into the water. As it sank beneath the surface, I felt a wave of relief. For the first time in years, I thought it might actually be over. That night, I slept better than I had in months. But when I woke up, the notebook was back on my bedside table. It was open to a new page. The words written there sent a chill through me. "You broke the promise. I don't know what to do anymore. I've thought about burning it, burying it, even taking it to some kind of paranormal experts, but deep down, I feel like nothing will work. I'm terrified that whatever is attached to this notebook isn't bound by the same rules as the rest of the world. The scratching has grown louder. I hear it now even when I'm not near the closet. Sometimes, late at night, I swear I hear faint whispers. I can't make out what they're saying, but the tone is angry. I'm writing this here because I don't know where else to turn. If anyone has experienced something similar, please let me know. I need to know a bowel load in this, and if you ever stumble across a strange market in a forgotten corner of the world, especially one run by a woman with shark teeth, do yourself a favor and walk away. Don't touch anything, don't take anything, and whatever you do, don't make any promises. Since writing this, things have taken an even darker turn. The whispers have become more distinct. I can't always catch the words, but they're sharp, guttural, and somehow feel as if they're being spoken directly into my mind. It's not just at night anymore. I hear them during the day, faint but persistent, no matter where I go. Last night, I decided to confront the notebook. I opened it for the first time since it reappeared on my bedside table. This time, the pages were no longer blank. Line after line was filled with phrases written in the same spidery handwriting. Some were in languages I didn't recognize, but the ones in English sent chills down my spine. You can't run. You belong to us. The deal is sealed. And at the bottom of the page, scrawled in larger, messier script, was a chilling message: return to the market. The thought of going back to that place makes my stomach churn, but I don't know what else to do. The energy around me feels heavier, suffocating. Shadows seem to move on their own, stretching toward me when I'm alone. My reflection in the mirror sometimes lingers a moment too long after I've turned away. This morning, I woke up with a fresh cut across my forearm. It wasn't deep, but it stung like a paper cut. The skin around it was red and inflamed, and the shape of the wound was eerily deliberate. It was a perfect X. I don't know how it got there. I live alone, and there's nothing in my apartment that could have done that accidentally. I've started seeing figures in my peripheral vision, blurred, indistinct shapes that vanish the moment I try to focus on them. Once, I swear I saw the old woman from the market standing in the corner of my bedroom, her sharp teeth glinting in the darkness. She didn't move, didn't speak, but her presence was suffocating. When I turned on the light, she was gone. I've decided to follow the notebook's instructions. As much as I fear what awaits me, I fear what might happen if I don't comply even more. I've booked a ticket back to the city. It's been years since I was there, and I don't even know if the market still exists, but I have to try. I feel like my life, or my soul, is hanging by a thread. To whoever reads this, if something happens to me, don't look for the market. Don't try to find the notebook. I don't think it's meant to be destroyed, and I don't think it can be escaped. I'll post an update once I get there if I can, but if you don't hear from me again, know this: the market is real, the notebook is real, and whatever is connected to it doesn't let go. A few years ago, I worked in a high-rise building downtown, the kind of place with sterile white hallways and endless cubicles. My office was on the 18th floor, and every morning, I would take the elevator up with a coffee in hand, dreading the monotony of the day ahead. One morning, I arrived earlier than usual to prep for a meeting. The elevator was strangely slow, so I opted for the stairwell. It was well lit, though eerily silent. As I climbed, I noticed a faint humming echoing through the space. It sounded like an old song, soft and haunting. By the time I reached the 12th floor, I decided to pause and catch my breath. The door to the 12th floor was slightly ajar, something I hadn't seen before. The 12th floor was under renovation. It had been closed for months, and no one was supposed to be there. Curious but cautious, I peeked inside. The humming was louder now, and I could see a woman sitting on the floor at the far end of the hallway. Her back was to me, and she was rocking slightly, humming that same tune. She wore a faded dress, one that seemed out of place, almost vintage. Her hair was long and disheveled. I hesitated. Something felt off. Excuse me, I called out, my voice echoing in the empty space. She stopped humming but didn't turn around. The silence stretched, pressing against my chest. I took a step back, my hand gripping the stairwell door. Before I could say anything else, she started humming again, louder this time, the tune discordant and grating. The rocking became more erratic. I bolted up the stairs without another glance, my heart pounding. When I reached my office, I told a coworker what I'd seen. He frowned and told me something that made my blood run cold. The 12th floor had been closed after a fire broke out 2 years earlier. A woman, a secretary, he thought, had died in the blaze. No one had been allowed back in since. I laughed it off, saying it was probably a squatter or someone who'd snuck in. But later that day, I overheard the building manager talking to security. They reviewed the cameras, and no one else had entered the stairwell that morning. A week later, I convinced myself the experience was just an overreaction. Stress, an early morning, and too much coffee had probably made my imagination run wild. Still, I avoided the stairwell. Every time I passed the closed-off door on the 12th floor floor while riding the elevator, my stomach churned. Then one evening, I had to work late. By the time I finished, it was past 9 p.m. and the office was eerily quiet. The elevator service had become unreliable after hours, often stopping for maintenance or getting stuck between floors. I debated waiting for it but decided to take the stairs to avoid being trapped. The stairwell was dimly lit now, with only every other bulb working. I kept my steps brisk, my shoes echoing sharply against the concrete. As I descended past the 13th floor, I noticed the door to the 12th floor was ajar again. My breath hitched, but I kept moving. That humming started again. It was faint at first, as if the sound was carried by the air itself. I froze. The melody was unmistakable, the same haunting tune I'd heard before. I couldn't resist looking through the small glass pane of the 12th floor door. The hallway beyond was darker than I remembered, with shadows stretching unnaturally across the walls. And there she was again, standing this time. Her back was still to me, but she was swaying side to side like before, her head tilted slightly as if she were listening for something. "Leave," I whispered to myself, but I couldn't move. As if she'd heard me, she stopped swaying. Slowly, she began to turn her head, but her body remained unnaturally still, her neck twisting further than seemed possible. I stumbled back, tripping over a step as her face came into view. Her eyes were black hollows, her mouth stretched into a wide, unnatural grin. The humming was no longer soft. It filled the entire stairwell, a chaotic, discordant wail. I scrambled to my feet and bolted down the stairs, skipping steps and gripping the railing so hard my knuckles turned white. I didn't stop until I was outside on the sidewalk, gulping in the cold night air. I looked up at the building, half expecting to see her peering out from one of the windows. But the 12th floor was dark, as it always was. The next day, I filed a formal complaint with building management. I didn't go into detail, just said there was something strange on the 12th floor. They dismissed it, saying it was impossible for anyone to access the space. It had been sealed for asbestos removal after the fire. I never took the stairs again, not even during fire drills. I quit the job a few months later, and every time I pass that building downtown, I feel a chill run down my spine. Months after I quit that job, I thought I put the experience behind me. I even started laughing it off when recounting it to close friends over drinks, turning it into one of those crazy work stories people tell to spice up dull conversations. But deep down, I knew I wasn't being entirely honest. The memories still haunted me in quiet moments, creepy back when I was alone or in dark, silent spaces. One night, about a year later, I woke up at 3:12 a.m., the kind of waking where your body feels electrified, like it knows something your mind hasn't caught up to yet. My apartment was silent, save for the faint hum of my refrigerator. But something felt wrong. My ears strained against the quiet. That's when I heard it, a faint, familiar humming. I sat bolt upright, my pulse thundering in my ears. The sound wasn't coming from outside, it was inside, drifting from somewhere down the hall. My stomach dropped as I realized it wasn't a song from a passing car or a neighbor's late night TV. It was the same haunting tune from the 12th floor. "No," I whispered, shaking my head as if denying it would make it disappear. The humming grew louder, more erratic, as though whoever or whatever was making it was drawing closer. My eyes darted to my bedroom door, slightly ajar, revealing the dark hallway beyond. I didn't remember leaving it open. I wanted to move, to grab my phone, to turn on a light, anything, but my body wouldn't respond. I was frozen in place, every muscle locked in terror. Then I saw it. A shadow passed through the sliver of light in the hallway, faint but unmistakable. It stopped, and the humming ceased abruptly. The silence that followed was even worse. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at the crack of the door, waiting, hoping it was my imagination. And then a whisper, low, guttural, and unmistakable, "Come see." The door creaked open slightly, just enough for me to glimpse a figure standing at the end of the hallway. My blood turned to ice. It was her, the same woman from the 12th floor. Her face was even more distorted than I remembered, the grin impossibly wide, her hollow eyes locked onto mine. She didn't move, but the air around her seemed to shimmer and bend, as though she was barely tethered to reality. I don't remember how I finally managed to move, but the next thing I knew, I was running out of my apartment barefoot, not even bothering to grab my keys. I fled down the street, not stopping until I reached an all-night diner where I sat shaking until sunrise. When I returned home later that morning, exhausted and half convinced I'd imagined the whole thing, I found my apartment door ajar. Nothing was missing, but the place felt rugged. The air was heavy, and there was an unfamiliar smell, faintly metallic, like burnt wires. I moved out the next week, breaking my lease without a second thought. I've never experienced anything like it since, but sometimes, when I'm alone in the quiet hours of the night, I'll hear the faintest hum in the distance. This happened a couple of years ago when I was working part-time as a receptionist at a small law firm downtown. It wasn't a flashy place, just an office suite on the 4th floor of an older building. The work was monotonous but easy: answer the phone, greet clients, and sort the mail. One afternoon, a man walked and carried a thick stack of folders. He looked completely unremarkable, mid-40s, thinning hair, wearing a beige suit that had seen better days. He smiled politely and said he had a delivery for one of the attorneys, Mr. Hill. I asked if he had an appointment, and he said no, but he insisted Mr. Hill was expecting him. I didn't recognize him, but Mr. Hill often had walk-in clients, so I didn't think much of it. I called Mr. Hill's office to let him know someone was here for him. Mr. Hill sounded confused and said he didn't know anyone by that description. When I relayed this to the man, his demeanor changed. The polite smile vanished, replaced by a look that made my skin crawl. "Just tell him it's urgent," he said, his tone sharp. "Who needs to say those?" He tapped the folders on the counter with an intensity that felt almost threatening. At this point, I started to feel uneasy, but I nodded and called Mr. Hill again. This time, he sounded annoyed. "I don't know who this guy is, and I'm not seeing him. Tell him to leave." When I relayed the message, the man's face darkened. He didn't say anything for a long moment, just stood there staring at me. Then he leaned in closer, too close, and whispered, "He'll regret this." I froze. My heart was pounding, but I managed to keep my voice steady as I told him he needed to leave. He finally backed away, but as he reached the door, he turned back and said, "You should be careful, too. Some secrets are dangerous." After he left, I locked the door and called building security. They took a report but didn't seem overly concerned. When I told Mr. Hill what had happened, he brushed it off, saying he had no idea who the man was or what he could have wanted. The whole thing felt off, but I tried to move on. A week later, I found a single folder on the reception desk when I came in for my shift. I didn't know how it had gotten there. There was no sign of forced entry, and no one else had access to the office. The folder was labeled with my name in blocky, uneven handwriting. Inside were pages and pages of photocopied documents, court records, old newspaper clippings, and what looked like medical reports. As I flipped through them, I realized they all had one thing in common: a recurring name. My last name. It was a name I didn't recognize, tied to events and people I had no connection to. Or so I thought. When I showed the folder to Mr. Hill and the office manager, they both looked concerned but couldn't make sense of it. We reported it to the police, but without any clear threat. They didn't have much to go on. I quit that job not long after. I didn't feel safe there anymore, especially knowing the man hadn't been caught or identified. I still think about that day sometimes, wondering who he was and how he knew my name. I don't work in offices anymore, and I've moved twice since then, but every now and then, I catch a glimpse of the beige suit or a stack of folders, and my heart races. After I left the law firm, I tried my best to put the incident behind me, but even after I started my new job at a small boutique, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It wasn't constant, but every so often, I'd catch someone staring just a moment too long or notice a figure lingering at the edge of my vision. I told myself it was paranoia, that I was overreacting. Still, I couldn't ignore the knots of unease that tightened in my chest whenever I thought about that man. A few months later, I received a package at my apartment. It was strange because I hadn't ordered anything, and the sender's address was blank. My stomach dropped when I saw my name scrawled across the front in the same uneven handwriting from the folder at the office. Inside was an unmarked USB drive and a single slip of paper. The paper read, "You deserve to know the truth." I debated whether to throw it away, but curiosity got the better of me. Against my better judgment, I plugged the USB into my laptop. It contained dozens of files, photos, scanned documents, and videos. As I opened the first folder, a chill ran down my spine. The photos were of me. Some were from years ago, pictures of me at college events, with friends, even family gatherings I didn't remember being photographed at. Others were more recent, including shots of me at the law firm and in my new neighborhood. Whoever had taken them had been watching me for a long time. I felt sick. My hands were shaking as I opened one of the scanned documents. It was a birth certificate, mine, but beneath my name was a note written in red ink, not her real name. The other documents were just as bizarre: legal papers about a child custody battle from decades ago, hospital records mentioning a Jane Doe infant, and police reports tied to missing persons cases. One of the videos was surveillance footage of a hospital hallway showing a woman I didn't recognize walking out with a bundled up baby. The timestamp was from the year I was born. I slammed my laptop shut and immediately called the police. They sent someone over to collect the USB drive and the package, but once again, there wasn't much they could do. The officers suggested I stay with a friend for a while, just to be safe, and I took their advice. For weeks, I was too afraid to go home. I stayed with my best friend, Emma, and told her everything. She tried to reassure me, saying it was probably just a stalker trying to mess with my head, but her concern was obvious. Then, one night, while we were watching TV, Emma's dog started barking at the front door. It was a low, growling bark, the kind he only made when something was wrong. I peeked out the window, but the street was empty. I tried to shake it off, but the dog wouldn't settle down. When Emma opened the door to check, she found another package sitting on the doormat. This one was smaller, wrapped in plain brown paper with no note attached. She wanted to throw it away immediately, but I couldn't. I had to know what was inside. We opened it together. Inside was a single Polaroid photo of a young girl, maybe 5 or 6 years old, standing next to the man with the folders. They were in front of a house I didn't recognize, but the girl looked oddly familiar. Beneath the photo, someone had scribbled, "You were never supposed to leave." They called the police again, but just like before, there wasn't much they could do. The officers said the photo could have been doctored and that without a clear thread, there wasn't enough evidence to investigate further. I started to feel like I was losing my mind. A few nights later, I woke up to the sound of knocking on Emma's door. It was just after 3 a.m. Emma and I froze, staring at each other as the knocking grew louder and more frantic. We didn't answer, and after what felt like an eternity, it stopped. When we checked the peephole in the morning, no one was there, but scratched into the wood of the door was a single word: leave. I've moved again since then, this time to another state. I've changed my phone number, deleted my social media, and done everything I could to disappear. But no matter where I go, I can't shake the feeling that someone is still watching me, waiting for the right moment to reach out again. After moving to another state, I did everything possible to erase my tracks. I got a new name for my mailbox, rented a place under a pseudonym, and used a VPN for everything online. I even started seeing a therapist to help me deal with the anxiety that had become my constant companion. For a while, it seemed to work. Months passed without any strange packages or unnerving encounters, and I started to believe I could rebuild my life. But then, late one evening, I got a phone call. The number was unknown, and I debated letting it go to voicemail, but something compelled me to answer. I immediately regretted it. At first, there was silence. Then a man's voice, low and calm, said, "You can't hide forever." I froze, my breath caught in my throat. Before I could respond, the line went dead. I sat there, staring at my phone, my mind racing. I tried to convince myself it was a prank call, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. I reported it to the police in my new city, but there wasn't much they could do. They suggested changing my number again, which I did, but the damage was done. The fragile sense of security I had built was shattered. A week later, I came home from work to find my apartment door slightly ajar. My heart sank. I was certain I had locked it that morning. I hesitated, debating whether to go inside or call the police. Ultimately, I chose the latter. When the officers arrived and cleared the apartment, they didn't find anyone, but they did find something on my kitchen table, a single folder identical to the ones the man had carried into the law firm all those months ago. Inside was a handwritten note: "You keep running, but you're only making it worse. Stop now, and I'll explain everything." The rest of the folder was filled with more of the same: photos of me, documents with my name on them, and, most chilling of all, a timeline of my moves since leaving the law firm. They knew everything, every address, every job, every attempt I had made to start over. The police took the folder as evidence, but I knew what they'd say. No direct threat, nothing actionable. Once again, I was on my own. That night, I packed a bag and checked into a hotel under an alias. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, not even Emma. I couldn't risk it. I stayed there for a week, trying to figure out my next move. On the 6th night, I woke up to a strange sound, the rustling of paper. I turned on the bedside lamp and froze. The small desk in the corner of the room was covered in folders, dozens of them. They hadn't been there when I went to bed. On top of the pile was another note: "You can't run from the truth. It's time to come home." I grabbed my bag and ran. I didn't even bother checking out of the hotel. I drove until I was out of the state, pulling over only when I couldn't keep my eyes open any longer. Now, I'm constantly on the move, never staying in one place for more than a few days. I don't use my real name for anything, and I avoid making connections with people. It's a lonely existence, but it feels like the only way to stay safe. Sometimes, I think about that man with the folders and the cryptic messages he left me. Who was he? What did he mean by the truth? Part of me wants to find out, to confront him and end this nightmare once and for all. But another part of me is terrified of what I might discover. I work as a delivery driver for a small courier company. We specialize in same-day deliveries for businesses and individuals, and our clients are spread across the city. One of my regular runs is to a sprawling hospital complex on the outskirts of town. The hospital's layout is confusing at best, a tangled mess of old and new buildings connected by endless hallways and skybridges. Last month, I was assigned a package labeled urgent, pathology department. It was late afternoon, and the hospital was already winding down for the day. The halls were eerily quiet, a sharp contrast to the usual daytime buzz. I followed the signs to pathology, navigating the maze of beige walls and flickery fluorescent lights. When I finally reached the department, the glass doors were locked and the reception area was dark. A sign on the door read, "After hours deliveries, please use the drop box." I'd used the drop box before. It was down a side corridor, tucked into a little alcove. The alcove itself always gave me the creeps. It was dimly lit, and the drop box was an old metal cabinet that groaned loudly whenever you opened it. As I approached, I noticed something strange. The air felt colder, and the usual hum of the hospital's ventilation system was absent. I chalked it up to nerves and slid the package into the drop box. Just as I turned to leave, I heard it, a faint tapping sound, like nails lightly drumming on metal. I froze, my hand still on the drop box handle. The tapping stopped. I told myself it was nothing and started walking back down the hall. The sound followed me, not footsteps, but more tapping, this time faster and more erratic, as if it were scrambling to keep up. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding in my chest. I reached the main hallway and glanced over my shoulder. Nothing. The corridor was empty. I turned back and nearly collided with a woman in scrubs. She looked as startled as I felt. "Sorry," I blurted. "Didn't see you there." She didn't respond, just stared at me with an odd expression, something between confusion and fear. Finally, she said, "We shouldn't be here. I was just dropping off a package," I explained, gesturing back toward the pathology wing. Her face went pale. "That wing's been closed for years," she whispered. I laughed nervously, thinking she was joking. "No, I was just there. The drop box is still." My voice trailed off as I noticed her backing away, her eyes wide with terror. Without another word, she turned and hurried down the hall, leaving me standing there, utterly bewildered. I spun around and looked back toward the pathology wing. The corridor I just walked down was now dark. The signs were gone. Even the alcove with the drop box was missing, replaced by a blank wall. I didn't wait to find out what was going on. I ran it. When I got back to the delivery van, I sat there shaking for a long time before finally driving away. The next day, I told my boss I wouldn't take any more deliveries to the hospital. I wish I could say that was the end of it, that after my boss reassigned me to other routes, life went back to normal. But whatever I encountered in that hospital wasn't done with me. About a week later, I was back on my usual route, delivering to offices downtown. It was a bright, sunny day, and the warmth was a welcome distraction from the lingering unease that had been gnawing at me since the hospital incident. Around lunchtime, I parked my van outside a tech startup to drop off a stack of legal documents. The building was one of those modern glass monstrosities, all reflective surfaces and sharp angles. As I waited for the receptionist to sign for the delivery, I glanced at the wall-mounted TV scrolling through security camera feeds from around the building. At first, I didn't pay much attention. The cameras showed the usual sights: the lobby, the parking garage, the rooftop terrace. But then one feed caught my eye. It was grainy and slightly distorted, but I recognized the corridor instantly. It was the same hallway from the pathology wing of the hospital, the one that had vanished. My stomach dropped as I stared at the screen. The corridor looked just as it had that night, dimly lit, with the same worn linoleum floors and flickery fluorescent lights. As I watched, a shadow moved across the frame, darting from one side of the hall to the other. "Everything okay?" the receptionist asked, handing me back the signed paperwork. I nodded quickly, trying to play it cool. "Yeah, thanks. Just noticed something weird on her security feed." She followed my gaze to the screen, then frowned. "It was not ours. Must be a glitch or something. Not yours," I echoed. My voice sounded distant, even to me. She shrugged. "Yeah, that feed's been popping up randomly for a few days now. We don't even have cameras in a place like that. It's looking into it." I left in a hurry, my mind racing. Why would that hallway show up on a security feed in a completely different building? And what was that shadow? That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the moment I saw the shadow, its movements sharp and unnatural, like it didn't belong in this world. Around 3 a.m., I gave up on sleep and decided to distract myself with some late night TV. But as I flipped through the channels, the screen suddenly went static. Then, for a split second, the corridor appeared. My heart stopped. It was the same view as the security feed, the same dim hallway, the same oppressive air. And then something stepped into frame. It wasn't a shadow this time. It was a figure, tall and impossibly thin, with arms that seemed too long for its body. Its head turned slowly, as if it could see me through the screen. I froze, unable to move or even breathe. Then it smiled, not with a mouth, but with a slow, twisting motion of its entire face. The screen went black. My TV refused to turn back on. The next day, I called out of work. My boss was annoyed, but I didn't care. I spent the day researching, trying to find any explanation for what was happening. I looked up the hospital, the pathology wing, and even the tech company where I'd seen the security feed. What I found left me cold. The pathology wing had indeed been closed years ago, after a series of strange incidents. Staff reported hearing disembodied voices, seeing figures out of the corner of their eyes, and feeling like they were being watched. It was eventually shut down after a lab tech went missing, never found, not even a trace. stories. As for the tech company, I found nothing unusual about the building itself, but one article caught my attention. The company had purchased some old security equipment from a liquidated hospital auction. The article didn't specify which hospital, but I had a sickening feeling I already knew. Since then, I've stopped delivery altogether. I'm working a desk job now, far away from hospitals, security cameras, and dimly lit corridors. But I can't shake the feeling that it's not over. Sometimes, late at night, I'll hear tapping, not at my window, but deep within the walls, faint and relentless. I try to ignore it, but every now and then, I catch myself looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see a long-limbed figure grinning back at me. I told myself that quitting the courier job and moving to a desk job would be the end of it, but the strange occurrences didn't stop. In fact, they began to escalate. At first, it was small things, lights flickering in my apartment, electronics behaving strangely, and the persistent feeling that I was being watched. My phone would buzz with notifications, only for me to find no new messages. When I tried to ignore it, the tapping sound returned, always faint, always in the walls. One night, I woke up to my phone vibrating violently on my nightstand. The screen was lit up with a notification, but it wasn't from any app I recognized. It was just a single message, glowing in the darkness. Lisayo. I stared at it, my heart pounding, before the screen abruptly went black. The phone wouldn't turn on again, no matter what I tried. I ended up smashing it out of sheer panic. I couldn't sleep after that. I sat in my living room with every light on, clutching a heavy flashlight for protection, even though I knew it wouldn't help. Around 4 a.m., the tapping started again. This time, it wasn't faint. It was loud, deliberate, and rhythmic, coming from directly behind me. I spun around, my flashlight beam shaking as I aimed it at the wall. Nothing, just drywall and paint, but the tapping continued, moving along the wall as if something was crawling inside it. I backed away, trembling, and tripped over my coffee table. When I hit the floor, the tapping stopped. The silence was suffocating. I lay there, too scared to move, until I heard it again, this time directly above me. A slow, deliberate tapping coming from the ceiling. I bolted. I grabbed my keys and ran out of the apartment, not stopping until I was in my car with the doors locked. I didn't know where to go, but I knew I couldn't stay there. I ended up driving to a 24-hour diner, parking in the back corner of the lot where I could see all the exits. I sat there for hours, watching the darkened streets and jumping at every shadow. Around dawn, as the sky began to lighten, I felt a strange sense of calm. Maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe I was finally starting to believe I'd imagined everything. But then I saw it. Across the parking lot, standing under a flickering streetlight, was the figure, tall, impossibly thin, with arms that stretched too far, its body twisted at unnatural angles. Its face was smooth and featureless, but I knew it was looking at me. It didn't move. It just stood there, its head tilted slightly as if waiting for something. I couldn't breathe. My hand shook as I fumbled for the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I slammed the car into reverse, tearing out of the lot without looking back. I don't remember much of the drive, only that I kept going until I was well outside the city, stopping at a roadside motel where the clerk didn't ask any questions. I've been living here for a week now, jumping at every noise and barely sleeping. My old apartment, I'm not going back. My things, they could keep them, but here's the thing, I don't think running is going to help. Last night, I heard tapping again, not in the walls, but at the motel door. 3 soft, deliberate taps. When I peeked through the peephole, no one was there. I used to work the closing shift at a small town library. While the library itself isn't relevant here, since you don't want a story about a library, it's worth noting that we closed at 8 p.m. and by the time I finished tidying up and locking the doors, it was usually closer to 8:30. Our parking lot was small and poorly lit, a single street light at the far corner casting just enough light to make the shadows deeper. One chilly October evening, I was the last to leave. My coworkers had gone ahead, leaving me to double check the alarms. I stepped outside, locking the door behind me, and felt the sudden stillness of the empty lot settle around me. The wind stirred dry leaves across the asphalt, and the sound echoed faintly in the surrounding quiet. As I approached my car, parked a little farther out than usual, I noticed something strange. A man was leaning against the trunk of the car next to mine. His head was tilted down as if he were texting, but something about his stillness seemed off. He didn't glance up or move as I approached, which only made me more uneasy. I hesitated for a moment, debating whether to walk back to the building, but the door was locked now, and the lot was empty except for the 2 of us. My phone was in my purse, and I didn't want to fumble for it, so I decided to walk to my car quickly, get in, and leave as fast as possible. As I reached for my car door, the man spoke. "Do you have a minute?" His voice was calm but too deliberate, like he had practiced saying it. "No, sorry," I said without looking at him, yanking the door open. "You drop this," he said, and that made me freeze. My first thought was that he had picked up something from the ground, but when I glanced at him, his hand was empty. No, I didn't, I said firmly, getting into my car. My hand shook as I pulled the door closed, and I reached for the lock button immediately. That's when he moved. He lunged toward my passenger side door, gripping the handle. I screamed, started the car, and floored it out of the lot. In my rearview mirror, I saw him standing there, staring after me. His face was completely blank. No anger, no frustration, just nothing. I called the police from a well-lit gas station a few miles away, shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone. They sent someone to the lot, but by the time they got there, he was gone. Here's the thing that still keeps me up at night. The police found something on the passenger side door handle, a folded piece of paper tucked under the handle so you'd only notice it when you tried to open the door. It was a note, scrawled in large, jagged letters were the words, "You shouldn't have ignored me." After filing the police report, I couldn't shake the feeling that the man in the parking lot wasn't just a random creep. He felt deliberate, like he had been waiting there for me specifically. The officers assured me they'd increase patrols in the area and suggested I vary my routine in case I had been targeted. That thought alone was terrifying. Why would anyone target me? The following days were a blur of anxiety. I started asking coworkers to stay late with me just so I wouldn't have to walk out to the parking lot alone. The first night I did this, my manager Lauren insisted on walking me to my car. As we approached, I felt my chest tighten when I saw something tucked under my windshield wiper, another note. Lauren noticed my hesitation and grabbed it before I could. She opened the paper and read it aloud, her voice trembling. "You made the right choice tonight." But I'm patient. We both froze. The parking lot was empty, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Lauren immediately called the police again, and I stayed at her house that night. I was too scared to sleep, and every small noise outside her window made my skin crawl. Over the next week, I became hyper-vigilant. I changed my parking spot, took different routes home, and even started carrying pepper spray. For a while, there were no more notes, and I hoped it was over. But then it escalated. One evening, as I left the library with a coworker, Megan, I spotted something on the driver's seat of my car. Through the window, I could see another piece of paper resting neatly on the seat. My stomach dropped. I hadn't left my car unlocked. I was sure of it. Megan stood guard while I unlocked the door, my hands trembling so badly it took a few tries to get the key in. I grabbed the note and unfolded it. Locks are just an invitation to try harder. I couldn't breathe. Megan pulled me away from the car, and we called the police yet again. This time, they dusted the car for fingerprints, but nothing came of it. The officers told me to take extra precautions, but they still had no leads. Whoever this was seemed to know how to avoid leaving any real trace. By now, I was completely paranoid. I stopped driving my car and started getting rides to and from work. My dad installed cameras around my house, and I started staying with friends whenever I could. Weeks went by without any incidents. Just as I was starting to feel like I could breathe again, it happened one last time. One night, I was sitting on my couch, scrolling through my phone, when I heard a soft knock at my window. It was so faint I almost thought I imagined it, but then it came again, 2 deliberate taps. My heart sank. My living room window faced the backyard, where there was no way someone should have been able to get in without jumping the fence. I didn't dare move. Instead, I grabbed my phone and called 911, whispering to the dispatcher what was happening. As I waited for the police, the tapping continued, slow and methodical, like whoever was there wanted me to know they weren't in a hurry. When the officers arrived and searched the yard, they didn't find anyone, but they did find another note taped to the outside of the window, right where the tapping had come from. This one said, "See you soon." I didn't sleep at all that night. The police set up patrols around my house for a few days, but nothing else happened. Eventually, I packed up and moved to another town, leaving behind my job, my house, and any sense of security I'd ever had. Moving to a new town was supposed to be a fresh start, but the fear followed me like a shadow. I rented an apartment in a secure building, the kind with keycard access and cameras in every hallway. I even made sure my unit was on the 3rd floor, thinking it would be harder for anyone to reach me there. Despite all the precautions, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The first few months were quiet. I threw myself into my new job and tried to rebuild some sense of normalcy. I didn't tell many people about what had happened, just a few close friends and family members who already knew the story. I didn't want to carry the stigma of being the paranoid new girl. Still, I kept my guard up. Every time I walked into my apartment, I double-checked the locks. I avoided routines, rarely taking the same route to work or running errands at the same time of day. Then, one evening, it happened again. I came home late after a work event, exhausted but relieved that the day was over. As I stepped into my apartment and closed the door behind me, I froze. Something was wrong. The air felt different, stale, like someone had been there. I scanned the room, my heart pounding. Nothing seemed out of place, no drawers open, no items missing. But then I noticed my bedroom door. It was ajar. I never left it open. I inched toward it, gripping my phone tightly. My thumb hovered over the emergency call button as I nudged the door open with my foot. The room was empty. sleep, but sitting on my neatly made bed was a single item, a small, black notebook. I didn't own a black notebook. Hands trembling, I picked it up and opened it to the first page. Scrawled in the same jagged handwriting as the notes before was a single sentence: "You can run, but you can't hide." I dropped the notebook and bolted out of the apartment, not even bothering to lock the door behind me. I ran down the hallway and straight to the building's security desk, where I demanded to see the footage from the cameras. The guard was kind but hesitant, insisting they needed approval from the property manager. I was frantic, nearly in tears, and finally he relented. We rewound the footage from earlier that evening, watching intently as people came and went. Then we saw it at 7:43 p.m. Just an hour before I got home, a man wearing a black hoodie and a baseball cap entered the building. He kept his head down, avoiding the cameras, but his movements were deliberate. He walked straight to the elevators, swiped something, a stolen keycard, maybe, and rode up to my floor. The footage didn't show him leaving. I felt like I was going to be sick. The guard immediately called the police, and within minutes, officers were swarming the building. They searched every unit, every hallway, every stairwell, but he was gone. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. The police took the notebook as evidence, but they had no solid leads. They advised me to stay somewhere else for a while, so I packed a bag and went to a friend's house. I couldn't sleep that night or the next. Every noise, every shadow felt like a threat. A week later, I received a call from the property manager. They had changed the locks on my unit and upgraded the building's security system. But what they said next chilled me to the bone. When they replaced the locks, they found something wedged inside the doorframe, a tiny wireless camera. It had been pointed directly at my living room. I moved out the next day. To this day, I have no idea who he was, how he found me, or what he wanted. I've changed my name, cut ties with most of my old connections, and moved to a new state. I don't post on social media, I don't go out alone, and I don't let my guard down. A few years ago, I was in a rush to find a new job after the company I worked for went under. I scoured local listings, online boards, and even community bulletins. That's how I came across the Midnight Flyer. The ad was tucked between lost cat posters and landscaping offers on a corkboard at a nearby coffee shop. It was printed in bold letters on glossy paper, seeking overnight courier, high pay, no questions asked. A number was listed below. Desperate for cash, I figured it was worth a call. A calm, professional voice answered and quickly explained the job. I was to meet a driver at a nearby industrial park at midnight, take a sealed package, and deliver it to a listed address by sunrise. I'd be paid in cash upon confirmation of delivery. Simple enough. The next night, I arrived at the industrial park, feeling the eerie stillness of the place. The black car with heavily tinted windows was idling near the entrance. The driver rolled down the window just enough to hand me a slim, unmarked package. "Don't open it," he said flatly. I was given an address about 200 miles away, a wad of cash for gas, and a disposable phone that would vibrate when I reached the destination. Then, the car drove off, leaving me alone under the flickering streetlights. The drive was uneventful at first, just long, dark highways stretching into nowhere. About halfway through, though, I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror. The car, a beat-up sedan, was trailing me. At first, I thought nothing of it. Maybe they were heading the same way. But every turn I took, every adjustment in speed, they followed. When I sped up, so did they. When I slowed down, they matched me. I finally decided to pull into a rest stop, hoping they'd just pass by. Instead, they pulled in behind me. My stomach dropped. I stayed in my car, gripping the steering wheel as I tried to figure out what to do. That's when the disposable phone in my passenger seat buzzed. The screen lit up with a single message: "Do not stop, do not engage." Heart pounding, I threw the car into drive and sped out of the lot. The sedan followed, its headlights flashing erratically now. It felt like a nightmare. I didn't know if they wanted the package, my car, or me. After what felt like hours of cat and mouse driving, I finally reached the address, a nondescript warehouse on the outskirts of a small town. The sedan had disappeared somewhere along the way, but my nerves were still on edge. I parked, clutching the package as I approached the door. A man in a black hoodie opened it before I even knocked. He didn't say a word, just took the package and handed me a thick envelope of cash. Then, he shut the door. I drove home, shaken but relieved. I didn't take another courier job after that. A week later, I saw a news report about a man found dead in a burned-out sedan on a highway near where I'd been followed. The reporter said foul play was suspected. After that night, I did my best to put the whole incident out of my mind. I told myself it was a one-off job, a desperate choice in a desperate time. But deep down, the unanswered questions gnawed at me. Who were those people? What was so important in that package that someone would risk their life, or take someone else's, to get it? Then, about a month later, it happened again. I was cleaning up my apartment when a knock came at the door. It was strange. I wasn't expecting anyone, and it was late, nearly midnight. When I opened the door, no one was there, but on the doormat sat a black envelope with my name written written on it in neat, blocky handwriting. I didn't want to touch it, just seeing it filled me with dread, but my curiosity got the better of me. Inside was a single piece of paper that read, "We need your help again. Same conditions, same pay." I stared at the note, feeling my stomach churn. There was no phone number, no contact information, just a location and a time. A desolate stretch of road outside the city. Tonight at 1 a.m. it was impossible they'd know where I lived unless they'd been watching me. I debated whether to go or to call the police, but the note had an unspoken threat. If I didn't show up, they might come back. So, like an idiot, I went. The road was pitch black and empty when I arrived. My headlights barely illuminated the surroundings, tall trees on either side, their branches clawing at the night sky. I parked, rolled down my window, and waited, anxiety clawing at me with every passing second. At exactly 1 a.m., another black car appeared out of nowhere, pulling up alongside mine. The window rolled down just a crack, and a gloved hand extended another package. This time, though, the driver spoke. His voice was low, measured, almost robotic. You know the rules. Same drop-off location. No stops, no questions. I took the package with shaking hands and nodded. As I drove away, I glanced in my rearview mirror, but the car was already gone. The drive was even worse than the first time. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching me. Every shadow on the road seemed to move. Every distant pair of headlights felt like they were following me. I couldn't tell if I was being paranoid or if the nightmare from the first job was repeating itself. When I finally reached the warehouse, the same man in the hoodie was waiting. He took the package, handed me an envelope of cash, and disappeared inside without a word. I stood there for a moment, staring at the door, wanting to scream at him for answers. But fear kept me silent. On the drive home, the disposable phone they'd given me vibrated. Another text appeared on the screen. "Thank you. Do not contact us again." That should have been the end of it. But the next morning, my car wouldn't start. When I opened the hood, I found the battery completely drained, wires snipped, and a single black feather tucked into the engine compartment. The feather wasn't from any bird I'd ever seen. It was massive, glossy, and faintly iridescent, like it belonged to something unnatural. I didn't keep it. I didn't want it in my house. I haven't heard from them since, but sometimes, when I'm driving alone at night, I catch glimpses of headlights behind me. They're always just far enough away that I can't make out the car, but they're there. Always following, always watching. For a while, life returned to something resembling normal. I avoided late night drives, didn't answer my door after dark, and stayed as far away from isolated areas as possible. I thought that maybe, just maybe, I was in the clear. But last week, something changed. It started small. At first, I thought my paranoia was just getting the better of me. I'd hear footsteps outside my apartment at odd hours or notice my curtains slightly out of place. Once, I found my front door unlocked, though I was certain I had secured it before bed. Nothing was missing, but I felt rugged. Then, 2 nights ago, I came home to find a single black envelope on my kitchen table. I froze. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely think. I hadn't let anyone in, and all my windows were locked. How had it gotten there? This time, the message was different. It ignored the rules. I didn't understand. I hadn't contacted them. I hadn't spoken about the jobs to anyone. I followed their instructions to the letter, but as I stood there, staring at the note, I realized something terrifying. They didn't mean I had broken the rules. They meant someone else had. The next day, I started getting phone calls from unknown numbers. At first, I didn't answer, but after the third call, curiosity or stupidity got the better of me. I picked up, but there was only silence on the other end. No breathing, no static, just empty, suffocating silence. I hung up, but the calls kept coming every hour on the hour. Then, last night, I woke up to the sound of my apartment door creaking open. My heart stopped. I grabbed the closest thing I could find, a lamp, and tiptoed toward the living room. The door was wide open, swaying gently in the breeze, but there was no sign of anyone. My apartment was empty, eerily silent except for the sound of my own breathing. And then I saw it, another black envelope placed neatly on my coffee table. This time, it was accompanied by something else, a photograph. The photo showed me sitting in my car, gripping the wheel during one of the courier jobs. I recognized the highway and the look of panic on my face. The note inside the envelope simply read, "One last delivery." They didn't include a location this time. No instructions, no package, just a warning. I don't know what they mean by one last delivery, but the implication is clear. They're not done with me. Today, I packed a bag and left my apartment. I don't know where I'm going, and I don't know if running will even help. But I can't shake the feeling that wherever I go, they'll find me. They always do. If you're reading this, let my story be a warning. Sometimes, desperation can lead you to doors you should never open. If you ever see a strange ad promising easy money, walk away. Burn the flyer, delete the email, throw out the card, and if you ever hear the words, "No questions asked," don't just walk, run. This happened a few summers ago when I was staying at a small hotel on the outskirts of a beach town. I was traveling alone for some much needed relaxation, and the hotel was perfect, not too expensive, not too crowded, with a small but beautiful courtyard. In the center of that courtyard was an old, in-ground pool. It wasn't anything fancy, just a simple rectangular pool surrounded by some cracked tiles and a few lounge chairs. Oddly enough, I noticed something strange on the first day. The pool was always perfectly clean, its water crystal clear, but I never saw anyone using it. Families with kids stayed at the hotel, but the kids only played in the courtyard or ran down to the beach. Even when the sun was blazing and the ocean was far too rough, no one so much as dipped a toe in the pool. It struck me as strange, but I didn't think too hard about it until the third evening. It was hot, humid, and still, the kind of weather that makes your clothes stick to your skin even in the shade. The beach was packed, and I wanted somewhere quieter. Looking at the empty courtyard, I thought, why not? I hadn't brought a swimsuit, but the idea of cooling off was too tempting to resist. I figured I could wade it up to my knees and enjoy the silence. I slipped on some sandals and made my way down. The pool shimmered under the golden light of the setting sun. It really was pristine, like a postcard. As I stepped onto the tiles, I caught a whiff of chlorine, sharp and clean. Still, there was something off. The air around the pool felt heavier, like it was pressing down on me. I hesitated, chalking it up to the weather, then took another step forward. And then I saw it. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. The water rippled faintly, even though there was no wind. Beneath the surface, something moved, a dark shape gliding smoothly, almost lazily. I froze, leaning in for a better look, when the shape stopped directly under my shadow. It was a hand, just a hand, floating palm up as if reaching for the surface. No body, no arm, just a pale, motionless hand. My breath caught in my throat. The pool water was so clear, I could see every detail, the knuckles, the faint wrinkles of the skin, even the slight curve of the fingernails. It didn't look like a severed limb or a prop, it looked alive, and then it began to curl its fingers, beckoning. I stumbled back, my heart racing. The tiles beneath my feet felt slick, and I nearly slipped. For a second, I thought about yelling for someone, but when I looked up, the courtyard was empty. I glanced back at the pool, and the hand was gone. Just like that, the water was calm again, rippling softly in the light breeze. I bolted back to my room and locked the door. I didn't sleep that night, my mind racing with explanations. Was it a trick of the light? What imagination? A swimmer who somehow vanished before I could see the rest of them. I wanted to believe any of those, but deep down, I knew it wasn't normal. The next morning, I decided to leave early. As I was checking out, I worked up the courage to ask the receptionist about the pool. She gave me a strange look, her polite smile faltering. "Oh," she said, looking uncomfortable. "We don't usually talk about it, but most people don't use the pool. There've been complaints. I pressed, feeling my stomach twist. She hesitated, then leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "Yes, I've seen things, felt things. We had someone say they were pulled under once, but..." She trailed off, shrugging as if to dismiss it. "It's an old pool. Probably just stories." I left without saying another word. For a while after that trip, I tried to forget about the pool. I told myself it was a combination of the heat, exhaustion, and maybe even dehydration that made me see things. But late at night, when everything was quiet, I'd find my mind wandering back to that courtyard and that pale, lifelike hand reaching up toward me. About 6 months later, I was scrolling through social media when I saw a post that made my stomach drop. Someone had shared an article about that same hotel, and the headline read, "Tourist drowns in hotel pool, mystery deepens." The article described how a young woman staying at the hotel had been found dead in the pool early one morning by a maintenance worker. The official cause of death was drowning, but what made the case bizarre was that the woman wasn't a swimmer and had a deep fear of water. According to friends she was traveling with, she refused to go near the pool for their entire stay. The article included a detail that made my skin crawl. There were no signs of a struggle or any obvious injuries. It was as if she had willingly walked into the water and just let herself sink. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't a coincidence. The memory of that hand flashed in my mind. Was it possible it had been reaching for her, too, beckoning her like it had done to me? And what would have happened if I hadn't stepped back that day? Curiosity got the better of me, and I started digging. I searched online for any mention of the hotel or its pool, scrolling through forums, review sites, and obscure blogs. That's when I stumbled upon something chilling. A local history website had a short entry about the hotel, which had been built in the early 1960s. Apparently, before it became a hotel, the land had been a private estate owned by a wealthy couple. The story went that the wife had been found dead in the pool under suspicious circumstances. Some accounts claimed she drowned herself after a bitter argument with her husband, while others hinted at foul play. The husband sold the property soon after, and the estate was eventually converted into the hotel. But here's the kicker, there was a comment on the article from someone claiming to be a former employee of the hotel. They said the pool had always been a source of unease, even back when it first opened. Guests reported hearing splashing late at night when the pool was supposed supposed to be empty. Some claimed they felt hands brushing against their legs when they swam. The hotel had apparently drained and refilled the pool several times over the years, but the strange occurrences never stopped. Reading this made my blood run cold. I wasn't just imagining things. There was something deeply wrong with that pool, and it wasn't going away. I don't know what's really happening there, and honestly, I don't want to know. I haven't been back to that beach town since, and I doubt I ever will. If you ever find yourself at a hotel with an empty pool that no one seems to use, do yourself a favor, stay away. Whatever's in the water ... you don't want it to notice you. For a while, I thought I was done with the story. It haunted me, sure, but I convinced myself that as long as I stayed far away from that hotel, it couldn't touch me. I was wrong. It started with the dreams. The first one wasn't particularly scary, just unsettling. I was standing in the courtyard again, staring at the pool. The water was calm and still, reflecting the faint light of a full moon. But as I approached, the reflection shifted. It wasn't the moon or the sky anymore. It was me staring back, but the face in the water wasn't quite right. My reflection didn't blink when I did, and the corners of its mouth curved into a small, knowing smile. I woke up drenched in sweat. My heart was pounding, and I told myself it was just a nightmare, nothing more. But the dreams kept coming, and they got worse. In one, I was standing on the edge of the pool, frozen in place, while the hand from before rose slowly out of the water. This time, it wasn't alone. More hands appeared, pale and bloated, reaching up, clawing at the air as if trying to escape. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, like marionettes on invisible strings. I wanted to run, but my feet wouldn't move. The hands grabbed my ankles and began to pull. I woke up gasping, my chest tight as if I'd been underwater. The sensation of cold, clammy fingers lingered long after I was awake. I started avoiding sleep, terrified of what I'd see next. The worst part, though, wasn't the dreams. It was the water. I began noticing puddles and strange places around my apartment. At first, I thought I was being careless, spilling water from the sink or leaving a glass tipped over. But the puddles were always in odd spots, the middle of my living room, under my bed, even on the seat of a chair I rarely used. They didn't make sense. Then came the sound. Late at night, when everything was quiet, I'd hear it, the faint, rhythmic slosh of water like someone treading in a shallow pool. It wasn't coming from the plumbing or outside. It was inside, close, always just on the edge of hearing. One night, I woke up to the sound of dripping. I sat up in bed, my heart racing, and saw a wet handprint on the wall next to my bedroom door. The fingers were long and thin, the print slightly smeared as if whoever left it had dragged their hand along the wall. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I couldn't take it anymore. I packed a bag and left my apartment the next morning, checking into a cheap motel across town. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. I stayed there for 3 nights, and nothing happened. No puddles, no sounds, no dreams. I started to think I left whatever it was behind, but on the 4th night, I came back to my room to find the floor soaked. Water pooled around the base of the bed, the edges of my bag, and the soles of my shoes. My heart sank. I knew what this meant. I'm writing this now from another hotel, one much farther away. I've moved twice already, but it doesn't seem to matter. Wherever I go, the water follows. It's been quiet for the last few days, but I know it's only a matter of time before it starts again. I don't know what it wants, or why it chose me, but if you've read this far, please listen to me, don't ignore the signs. If you see a hand in the water, or hear splashing where there shouldn't be, walk away. Run if you have to. Whatever it is, it doesn't let go. This happened about 3 years ago when I worked as a night security guard at a water treatment plant on the edge of my city. It wasn't the most glamorous job, but it paid the bills, and the hours let me avoid the usual chaos of daily life. My shift was from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and most nights were uneventful. I'd patrol the perimeter, check the cameras, and occasionally log maintenance calls. The plant was huge, sprawling tanks, endless pipes, and humming machinery, all surrounded by a tall chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. One night, just after midnight, the power went out. This wasn't unheard of, but it was rare. Usually, the backup generator kicked in immediately, but this time, nothing happened. The entire plant was plunged into darkness, the hum of machinery replaced by an eerie, all-encompassing silence. I grabbed my flashlight and radio, trying to stay calm. The main control room was at the far end of the facility, so I started making my way there to check the breaker panel. My flashlight cast long, jittery shadows on the walls, and every small sound, my footsteps, the rustle of my jacket, felt amplified. About halfway there, I heard something. It was faint, almost imperceptible at first, but it quickly grew louder, a metallic scraping, like someone dragging something heavy along the concrete floor. My heart raced. As far as I knew, I was the only one on duty. I called out, "Hello, is someone there?" My voice echoed back to me, but there was no response. The scraping stopped. I shone my flashlight in the direction of the sound, but the beam revealed only a maze of pipes and machinery. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I quickened my pace toward the control room, the unease growing with every step. When I I finally reached the room, I found the breaker panel and saw that everything looked fine, no trip switches, no obvious issues. That's when I noticed the door to the electrical maintenance tunnel was slightly ajar. This was odd because I'd locked it earlier during my patrol. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open with my flashlight. The tunnel was narrow, lined with conduits and cables, and it stretched into the darkness. At the far end, I saw a faint, flickering light, like someone was using a weak flashlight or candle. "Who's there?" I called again, trying to sound authoritative. No answer. Instead, the light flickered once more and then went out. The metallic scraping started again, this time accompanied by a low, guttural sound, almost like a growl. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I backed away and slammed the door shut, blocking it again. My mind raced. Was it an animal? A person? I didn't want to stick around to find out. I radioed my supervisor to report the situation, but all I got was static. A comms must have gone down with the power. I decided to head back to the security office where I could lock the door and wait for help. As I retraced my steps, I heard the scraping noise again, this time much closer. It sounded like it was following me. I broke into a jog, my flashlight bouncing wildly, casting shadows that seemed to dance and writhe. When I reached the office, I slammed the door shut, locked it, and pressed my back against it, panting. The office had a small emergency battery pack for the security monitors, so I turned it on to check the cameras. Most of them were out, but one near the maintenance tunnel was still working. The screen showed a figure standing at the edge of the tunnel. They were tall, unnaturally so, and their head tilted slightly as if listening. They didn't move. They just stood there, staring directly at the camera. And then the screen went black. I don't remember much after that. When the power finally came back on an hour later, the maintenance crew arrived, followed by my supervisor. I tried to explain what had happened, but they found no evidence of anyone else in the plant. The tunnel was empty, and the camera footage was corrupted. They chalked it up to my imagination and the stress of being alone in the dark. After I quit the job at the water treatment plant, I did my best to move on with my life. I took a new job at a warehouse, working more regular hours, and tried to forget about the eerie night. But some things just don't leave you. About a month later, I started having nightmares. They weren't vivid, just unsettling. In the dreams, I was always back at the plant, wandering the tunnels. I could hear the metallic scraping and that low growling sound, but I could never see what was making it. Sometimes, I'd wake up drenched in sweat, convinced I'd heard the sound in my room. One night, I got a call from a former coworker at the plant. He sounded uneasy, almost scared, as he told me about a strange incident. The new night guard, my replacement, had gone missing. They found his flashlight and radio near the maintenance tunnel, but no sign of him. The last footage from the security cameras showed him walking toward the tunnel entrance. After that, just static. I wanted to dismiss it as a coincidence, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was connected to what I experienced. My coworker pressed me for details about why I left so suddenly, but I couldn't bring myself to tell him everything. What could I say? That something not entirely human might be lurking in the tunnels. A few weeks after that call, things got worse. One evening, while I was home alone, the power went out. At first, I thought it was a simple outage, but when I looked outside, the other houses on my street still had their lights on. That's when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of scraping metal, faint but growing louder. It was coming from somewhere inside my house. I froze, my heart pounding. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, scanning the room. The sound seemed to be moving, growing closer. I backed into a corner, clutching my phone. When I saw it, a shadow too tall and too thin to be a person, flickering just at the edge of the light. Its head tilted, just like the figure on the camera. I don't remember screaming, but my neighbors told me they heard me. One of them called the police, who found me huddled in the corner of my living room, shaking and unable to speak. There was no sign of anyone else in the house, but the officers noticed long, deep scratches on the hardwood floor, trailing from the back door to where I had been standing. After that, I couldn't stay in the house. I moved in with a friend and eventually left the city altogether. I've tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was stress, paranoia, or some elaborate prank. But deep down, I know better. After moving to a new city, I thought I'd finally left it all behind. The nightmares became less frequent, and for the first time in months, I started to feel like myself again. I avoided dark places, made sure every door and window was locked, and kept lights on in every room of my apartment. I even bought a dog, a big, protective German Shepherd named Max, thinking he'd keep me safe and give me peace of mind. For a while, everything seemed fine. Max was a great companion, and I started to believe the thing, whatever it was, had stayed behind. But deep down, I couldn't shake the paranoia. Every so often, I'd feel like I was being watched, like there was something just out of sight, waiting. Then, about 6 months after the last incident, it happened again. One night, I was walking Max in the park near my apartment. It was late, around 11 p.m., but the park was well lit, and I wasn't far from home. Max was usually calm and steady, but that night, he was restless, his ears perked up, and he kept stopping to sniff the air, growling low in his throat. "What is it, buddy?" I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. I scanned the park but didn't see anyone. The paths were empty and the trees barely moved in the light breeze. Then Max stopped dead in his tracks. His growl turned into a snarl, and he barked, a deep, ferocious sound that echoed through the quiet park. I followed his gaze and saw it. In the shadows beneath a cluster of trees, there was a figure. It was tall, impossibly thin, and its head was tilted at that same unnatural angle. The shadows seemed to cling to it, like it was part of the darkness itself. I froze, every instinct screaming at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. Max lunged forward, barking furiously, straining against the leash. The figure didn't flinch or retreat. It just stood there, watching, and then it stepped closer. The way it moved wasn't right. It didn't walk. It seemed to glide, the shadows bending and stretching around it. The scraping sound started again, faint but unmistakable, like metal dragging against concrete. "Let's go, Max." I finally managed to choke out, tugging on his leash. He resisted for a moment, still barking, but then he turned and ran with me. We sprinted out of the park, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I didn't look back. When we got home, I locked every door and window, turned on every light, and sat in the corner of the living room with Max at my side. He wouldn't stop growling, his eyes fixed on the front door. I stayed awake all night, clutching a kitchen knife and jumping at every little sound. By morning, Max had calmed down, but I hadn't. I knew it wasn't over. Over the next few weeks, things escalated. I started finding scratches on my apartment walls, long, deep gouges that weren't there before. Max became more anxious, barking at nothing and refusing to go near the windows. My neighbors started complaining about strange noises coming from my unit at night, scraping, growling, and the sound of heavy footsteps. But I wasn't making those sounds. One night, I woke up to Max barking furiously at the bedroom door. When I turned on the light, I saw them scratches, fresh and deep, carved into the inside of the door. Whatever it was, it had been inside my apartment while I slept. I couldn't stay there anymore. I packed a bag, grabbed Max, and left that night, driving with no destination in mind. I've been living out of motels ever since, never staying in one place for more than a few days. Max and I are always on edge, always looking over our shoulders. And the worst part, it's not just the sounds or the scratches anymore. Sometimes, in the corner of my eye, I see it, a shadow that's too tall, too thin, and tilts its head just so. It's always there, watching, waiting. A few summers ago, I worked as a lifeguard at the community pool. It was a great job for a college student, lots of sun, decent pay, and I got to know pretty much everyone in the neighborhood. Most nights, I didn't have to work late since the pool closed at 9 p.m., but one week, I was assigned the closing shift. It wasn't bad, I just had to lock up and make sure everything was clean and secure before leaving. The pool was part of a larger rec center, and during my shift, I was the only one on duty. I remember it was a Tuesday night, and it had been unusually quiet, just a couple of families during the day and no one during the evening hours. By the time 8:45 rolled around, the place was dead silent, save for the hum of the pool filters. I was sitting in the lifeguard chair, scrolling on my phone, when I heard what sounded like a splash. It startled me because I was absolutely certain no one else was there. I stood up and scanned the pool, but the surface was perfectly calm. I figured maybe a leaf had fallen in or something small had shifted in the water. 10 minutes later, I was starting my lockup routine. I grabbed the pool skimmer to clear the water of any debris and walked around to inspect the fences and gates. As I passed the deep end, I felt the oddest sensation, like someone was watching me. I stopped and turned around, expecting to see someone, but again, there was nothing. The air felt heavy, like the kind of pressure you feel before a storm. I chalked it up to my imagination, finished my inspection, and headed to the locker room area to turn off the lights. As I flipped the switches, the reflection from the pool caught my eye. In the dim light, I could swear I saw a ripple, like something or someone was moving under the water. But when I stepped back out, the pool was still and empty. This was when I started to feel genuinely uneasy. I grabbed my bag and made my way to the main gate. I had just slid the padlock into place when I heard it, a loud, unmistakable splash, followed by the sound of something breaking the surface. My stomach dropped. I turned around and froze. There was a figure in the water, floating just beneath the surface, its shape distorted by the ripples. It didn't move like a swimmer, there was no kicking or arm strokes, just this unnatural, slow motion, like it was gliding. I called out, "Hey, the pool is closed. You can't be in there." The figure stopped. Slowly, its head broke the surface, and I'll never forget what I saw. It wasn't a person, not entirely, at least. Its face was pale, almost translucent, with large, hollow eyes that reflected the faint glow of the pool lights. It didn't say anything. It just stared at me, unblinking. My fight or flight instincts kicked in, and I ran to my car without looking back. I locked the doors, started the engine, and sped out of the parking lot. The next day, I told my manager what happened. He laughed it off, saying the pool was probably haunted. Apparently, there was a rumor remember about a drowning years ago, but I'd never heard it before. The thing about that experience is that it didn't end when I sped away that night. For the next few days, I felt like I was being followed. At first, I brushed it off as paranoia, but small things started to happen that made me second guess myself. The night after the incident, I was lying in bed, replaying everything in my head. Just as I started to drift off, I heard a faint dripping sound. At first, I thought it was coming from the bathroom, but when I got up to check, the faucets were dry. The sound continued, rhythmic and deliberate, and it seemed to be coming from somewhere closer, like inside my room. I looked around but found nothing. It stopped after a few minutes, but I barely slept that night. The next morning, I noticed something strange. My swimsuit, which I'd left hanging to dry in the bathroom, was soaking wet again as if it had just come out of the pool. I hadn't used it since my shift, so there was no reason for it to be wet. I told myself it was probably just damp from the humidity, but deep down, I knew that wasn't it. Things escalated the following evening. I was watching TV when I heard a splash from outside. I live nowhere near a pool or water, so the sound immediately put me on edge. I went to the window and peered out into the yard, but there was nothing unusual, just the shadows of trees swaying in the wind. Then I saw it, a faint, wet footprint on the concrete outside my back door. It was small, like a child's, but distorted, as though it had been made by something not entirely human. I slammed the curtains shut and spent the rest of the night curled up on the couch, lights on, TV playing softly in the background to keep me company. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, waiting. The final straw came 3 nights later. I was asleep when I was jolted awake by a loud banging sound. It was coming from the bathroom. Heart pounding, I grabbed my phone and crept down the hallway. When I opened the bathroom door, the entire floor was covered in water and the shower was running at full blast. But here's the thing, the water wasn't just filling the tub, it was rising up the walls, defying gravity. I stood there, frozen, as the water rippled and shimmered unnaturally. Then, from the corner of the mirror, I saw it. That face, pale, hollow-eyed, and staring right at me. It wasn't in the mirror, it was behind me. I ran out of the house without looking back. I drove to a friend's place and stayed there for the next few days, too afraid to go home. Eventually, I called in a plumber and pretended I had a serious water issue to explain the mess. He couldn't find anything wrong. I quit the pool job the next day and moved back in with my parents for the rest of the summer. To this day, I don't know what that thing was or why it seemed to follow me. I haven't been back to that pool since, and I never swim alone anymore. For months after I left that job, I couldn't shake the memories of what happened. I avoided pools altogether, even public ones, and the thought of swimming alone made my skin crawl. I started sleeping with the lamp on and always double-checked my doors and windows at night. It felt like overkill, but I didn't care. I just wanted to feel safe again. For a while, things seemed to settle. I moved back to college for the fall semester and kept myself busy with classes and work. Life returned to some semblance of normalcy, but just when I thought I could finally move on, it happened again. It was late October, and I was in the campus library finishing a group project. My teammates had left for the night, but I stayed behind to finish my portion. The library was nearly empty, and the sound of my keyboard echoed in the quiet. At some point, I realized I was thirsty, so I grabbed my water bottle and went to the nearest fountain. As I bent down to take a sip, I noticed something odd in the reflection of the stainless steel spout. The faint outline of a face, pale, hollow-eyed, and unmistakably familiar, stared back at me. My blood ran cold, and I whipped around, but there was no one there. The library was as silent as ever. I told myself it was just my imagination, a trick of the poor lighting and my tired mind. But when I returned to my desk, my laptop screen was fogged up, as if someone had been breathing on it. In the condensation, a single word was scrawled, "Soon." I packed up my things and bolted out of the library. I didn't even care about the strange looks I got from the night staff as I sprinted out the doors. Back at my dorm, I locked myself in and called my parents, desperate for some kind of reassurance. They tried to comfort me, suggesting I was stressed or imagining things. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just in my head. The worst incident came a week later. It was Halloween night, and I was at a party off campus. I had been trying to distract myself from the lingering fear, and for a while, it worked. The music, laughter, and bright costumes made me feel normal again. Around midnight, I stepped outside to get some fresh air. The backyard was dark and quiet, the party noise muffled through the walls. As I stood there, staring up at the stars, I heard a faint dripping sound behind me. I turned slowly, heart pounding, and saw it. A trail of wet footprints leading toward me. They started faint, almost unnoticeable, but grew darker and wetter with each step closer. My chest tightened as the dripping grew louder, closer, until I could feel the dampness creeping into the air around me. And then there it was, standing just a few feet away, its translucent skin glistening under the moonlight. Those hollow eyes bored to mine, and its mouth opened, releasing a gurgling, choking sound. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body wouldn't move. It took another step closer, water pooling around its feet. Desperation took over, and I bolted back into the house, shoving past confused partygoers as I fled through the front door. I didn't stop running until I reached my dorm. I I didn't sleep that night, and I spent the next few days jumping at every shadow and noise. I don't know what it wants or why it's attached to me, but I've spent every day since trying to avoid water in any form. I take the quickest showers possible, refuse to go near fountains or pools, and carry a small bottle of salt in my bag, something I read might help ward off spirits or entities tied to water. This happened a couple of years ago when I had just moved to a new city for work. I was in my late 22nd and excited to explore my new surroundings. One evening, I realized I had run out of a prescription I needed. It wasn't life-threatening, but skipping doses wasn't an option. I decided to head out to find a nearby pharmacy. It was late, around 9:30 p.m., and most places were closing soon. After checking my phone, I found one about a 15-minute walk away that claimed to be open until midnight. Perfect. I bundled up against the chilly wind and started walking. The streets were oddly quiet for a city. The further I walked, the fewer streetlights there seemed to be. By the time I reached the area where the pharmacy was supposed to be, I felt uneasy. The neighborhood wasn't sketchy, but it felt off. The air was heavy, and every sound seemed amplified. My footsteps, the rustling of leaves, the distant hum of a car engine. When I arrived, I saw the sign, Hudson's Pharmacy. The letters were faded, and the glass windows were frosted, obscuring the view inside. The door was slightly ajar, which struck me as strange. I hesitated, but figured maybe someone had forgotten to close it properly. I stepped inside and was immediately greeted by a musty smell, like old books and something metallic. The lighting was dim, and the aisles were narrow and cluttered. There was a faint hum, possibly from an old refrigerator in the back. "Hello," I called out. No answer. The place felt abandoned, but there were items on the shelves, old, dusty boxes of cold medicine and faded pill bottles with labels I didn't recognize. A small bell sat on the counter. I hesitated but gave it a light tap. It let out a muted ding. From somewhere in the back, I heard shuffling. My stomach tightened. A figure emerged, a man, maybe in his 60 seconds, with thin, wispy hair and a hollow look in his eyes. He didn't say anything, just stared at me. "Hi, I need to fill a prescription," I stammered, holding up the bottle. He didn't respond, just reached for the bottle. Reluctantly, I handed it to him. He looked at it, then at me, then disappeared into the back without a word. Minutes passed. The silence was oppressive. My instincts were screaming at me to leave, but I didn't want to be rude or overreact. I glanced around the store, noticing that many of the products were way past their expiration dates, some by decades. Finally, the man returned, holding a small paper bag. He handed it to me, his hand trembling slightly. "How much do I owe you?" I asked. "No charge," he said in a flat, emotionless tone. I opened my mouth to protest but decided against it. "Thank you," I muttered and quickly left. As soon as I stepped outside, I felt like I could breathe again. The air was crisp and fresh, a stark contrast to the stifling atmosphere inside. I didn't stop walking until I was back home. Once inside, I opened the bag. Inside was a pill bottle, but it wasn't mine. The label had my name, but the pharmacy's name and address were completely unfamiliar. The pills inside were a strange, off-white color, and the bottle itself looked old, like it had been sitting on a shelf for years. I was freaked out. I decided to toss the bottle and forget about the whole thing. The next day, I called my usual pharmacy to explain what had happened and get a proper refill. The pharmacist seemed confused when I mentioned the name Hudson's Pharmacy. "There's no Hudson's Pharmacy in this city," she said. "Are you sure you didn't misread the sign?" I insisted that I had it and even described the location. She was quiet for a moment before speaking again. "That building's been empty for decades. It used to be a pharmacy, but it closed down in the late 90s. There was an incident, a fire. I think nobody's used it since." I hung up, shaken. I never walked in that direction again, and to this day, I have no idea what happened that night. I tried to push the incident out of my mind, chalking it up to some strange misunderstanding. Maybe I'd walked into a pop-up clinic or some unofficial operation that wasn't listed anywhere, but something about the old man's hollow stare and the eerie silence of the place kept creeping back into my thoughts. A couple of weeks passed, and life returned to normal. I refilled my prescription at my usual pharmacy, and things felt fine, until one night, when I woke up at exactly 3:13 a.m. to the sound of a faint tapping. At first, I thought it was a branch brushing against the window, but then I realized the tapping was rhythmic. 3 taps, a pause, then 3 more. It was coming from my front door. My heart started racing as I lay frozen in bed. I live on the 3rd floor of an apartment building with a secured entrance. No one could just wander up here. The tapping continued. Gathering my courage, I tiptoed to the door and peeked through the peephole. At first, I saw nothing but the dimly lit hallway. Then, slowly, a figure stepped into view. It was the old man from the pharmacy. He was standing impossibly still, staring directly at the peephole as if he could see me through it. His face looked even more gaunt and lifeless than I remembered, and his eyes his eyes were milky, as though he were blind. But somehow, I knew he wasn't. I backed away from the door, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. The tapping started again, louder this time. 3 taps, and pause. 3 more. I grabbed my phone and called the building's security desk. My voice was shaking as I explained that there was an intruder on my floor. The security guard assured me he'd come up right away and told me to stay inside. The tapping stopped abruptly. I waited in tense silence, listening for any sign of movement outside. After what felt like an eternity, I heard the elevator ding and the heavy footsteps of the security guard. I rushed to the door and opened it. The hallway was empty. The guard checked the stairwells and security cameras but found nothing. He told me he'd stay on patrol for the rest of the night, but his confused expression made it clear he thought I'd imagined the whole thing. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next day, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. At work, on the bus, even in my own apartment, I felt like someone or something was just out of sight. Then, the dreams started. They weren't nightmares, exactly, but they were unsettling. I'd find myself back in Hudson's pharmacy, wandering the aisles, unable to find the exit. The old man would appear, his hollow eyes locking onto mine, and he'd whisper something I couldn't understand. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my sheets damp and twisted. One morning, I woke to find the same paper bag from the pharmacy sitting on my kitchen counter. I hadn't brought it in, I was sure of that. My apartment was locked, and there was no sign of a break-in. Inside the bag was the same strange pill bottle, only this time, the label had no name. It was blank. That was the last straw. I packed a bag and stayed at a friend's place for a few days while I tried to figure out what to do. I even considered moving, but the lease made it difficult. After a few weeks, things seemed to settle down. The strange tapping stopped, and I stopped having the dreams. I convinced myself it was all some bizarre coincidence, maybe even stress-induced. But then, last week, I was scrolling through my phone when I got a notification, a new text message from an unknown number. It was a picture of Hudson's pharmacy. I froze, staring at the message. My hand shook as I tapped on the unknown number, hoping there might be some explanation. But when I tried to call, the line didn't connect. The number didn't even seem valid. It was as if the message had appeared out of thin air. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was someone playing a cruel joke, someone who knew about my experience. But I hadn't told anyone except my closest friend, Jenna, and she wouldn't have done something like this. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on my couch with all the lights on, clutching my phone like a lifeline. Every creak of the apartment made me jump. Every shadow on the wall seemed to move. Around 2 a.m., my phone buzzed again. Another text. This time, it was a photo of my building. The shot was taken from the street below, angled up toward my apartment window. I dropped the phone like it burned me. Fighting a rising wave of panic, I crept toward the window and peeked out. The street was empty, the usual city hum eerily absent. But as I scanned the area, I spotted a figure standing under the street lamp across from my building. It was the old man. He didn't move. He just stood there, his face tilted upward, looking directly at my window. My stomach churned as I stumbled back, my mind racing. How had he found me? How was any of this even possible? I called the police, my voice trembling as I explained what was happening. The dispatcher assured me they'd send someone over, but by the time the officers arrived, the old man was gone. They took my statement, but I could tell they thought I was overreacting. One of them even suggested I install better curtains to help me feel safer. After they left, I considered packing a bag and leaving town entirely. But where would I go? The unease followed me like a shadow. No matter how far I ran, I couldn't shake the feeling that the old man, or whatever he was, would find me. The next day, I decided to face my fear head on. It was reckless, I know, but I couldn't live like this anymore. I needed answers. I called in sick to work, grabbed my keys, and drove back to the location of Hudson's pharmacy. When I arrived, my stomach sank. The building was boarded up, the windows covered with wooden planks that looked like they hadn't been touched in decades. The faded sign was still there, but the door was sealed tight, and weeds grew thick around the base of the structure. It looked completely abandoned. I walked around the perimeter, searching for any sign that someone had been there recently. Nothing. It was as if the place I had visited that night didn't exist, or at least, not in the way I remembered it. But as I turned to leave, I noticed something wedged between the boards covering the front door. A single, weathered piece of paper. I pulled it out, my hands trembling. It was a prescription slip. My name was printed at the top, along with today's date. The medication listed wasn't what I normally took. It wasn't even a real drug. It was just a series of numbers and letters that made no sense. Scrawled at the bottom, in handwriting that looked jagged and uneven, were 3 words. Don't come back. I didn't need to be told twice. I dropped the slip and ran to my car, my heart pounding like a drum. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. For a brief moment, I thought I saw the old man standing in the pharmacy's doorway, watching me leave. That was months ago. I've since moved to a different city, changed my phone number, and cut ties with anything that might lead back to that night. So far, I haven't received any more messages, and the dreams have stopped, but sometimes, late at night, I'll wake up to the faint sound of tapping. It's probably nothing, just my mind playing tricks on me. At least, that's what I tell myself. Alright, but that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But as always,
Have a nice day.